Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became a yokai sensation part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story ToxicPooPoo from AO3. So let's start the video. Izuku Midoriya lost his eye when he was 4 years old. And before living in the city, before becoming twisted into forces that society never thought existed, Izuku, Katsuki, and their families settled in a rural area north of Japan. It was quiet, some would say too quiet. The light whistle of liberated winds or the rustling leaves embracing each other from the forest across from them were the only sounds. A ghost town would be a perfect fit, if not for the actual people living there. Across the flailing grass of saturated green and sweet droplets of dew slowly dripping down each blade, salt was layered into thick lines and sank deep into their soil. Their crystals reflected the sun's beating light as it gave the ground a glassy tint, creating lustrous gleams around pathways, parks, gates, and even the occasional tree if it held more significance than the others. What's a town without its secrets? There were rules to be followed. Those rules were odd, like lock your doors, stay inside by sundown. Keep windows closed and shut before sundown. Leave out a nice snack in front of your patio door each night. Izuku wasn't a rule breaker, he was a follower, a simple boy in a simple area. He followed the rules because he had to. So when he wandered around the woods without permission at night, when he encountered someone that no one should have ever crossed paths with, when he came back home with a large gash striking down his left eye and with no promise of ever seeing out of it again, Izuku knew he had made a grave mistake. It was because of those weird sensations and those new emotions branching out in the back of his mind, luring him in with a blurred curiosity. He remembers when the crickets stopped chirping and the faint patter of rabbit feet ceased. When the sound of nothingness revolved around him, devoured him, tempted him to enter the gaping mouth of darkness which the trees embraced. Bulky hooves strut down the cobble path with unnatural superiority. The palpable silence, broken. A hidden figure sat on the dark horse, a slender object in one of her hands and a strange object resembling a misshapen ball in the other. They both shot up the forest trail, straight towards Izuku, and all he could do was stare at the dark mass until it was right in front of him. He was able to sense the being. Able to sense when it was coming straight towards him. And then they stopped, stared down Izuku like a piece of meat. He burned a hole into the ground as the creatures burned holes into the back of his head. Each glare they took, the analyzing stare and the judgmental glances, it placed Izuku into a mental cage. He couldn't move. And worst of all, he was able to know what it was feeling. He remembered that feeling of evil and it scared him the most. The next thing he knew was the rattly crack of a strange WHP swing against his eye, and then the echo of hooves and the headless woman in the distance. The excruciating waves of pain, the blackout, the lost eye, and the discovery of an ability that Izuku would fight with until he died. The Dullahan is a headless being that walks vacant paths at night, their head in one hand and a WHP made of human spines in the other. Their horse carries her on their back as they travel along the countryside, disaster etched into their paths. Izuku was an unfortunate soul to cross paths with her, his eye removed by the crack of her WHP. Izuku was quirkless, and he still is quirkless. At the age of 4 he never had an explosion quirk, a super strength quirk, he didn't have any type of quirk that could defend him from the Dullahan. Yet he did have an ability. One that he found out wouldn't exactly help him as a quirk would. In fact, it just made things worse. You're going to UA. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 stands in front of Izuku with his back facing the classroom exit. A brick wall would be the best way to describe his presence. The blonde's face, stoic and cold, his emotions gone from visibility. Of course, the boy's brows are furrowed, as usual. His fists are squeezed into ball and certain muscles are tense to contain his anger, as usual. But if one were to observe the words he spits out, they could notice the poison that laces between them. How harshly they grate against Izuku's ears, and how he knows 𝐻𝐻𝐿 would bask in the satisfaction once he acknowledges this. Izuku shudders as he stands in 𝐻𝐻𝐿's shadow, his body begins to tremble. Ever so slowly he nods up and down, averting his eyesight in a silent agreement. For years and years, one after another, the two boys had a secret communication. An agonizingly long glare from the blonde would shake Izuku to his core. It eventually translated to a, "Don't even try to talk to me." A growl headed in his direction meant an, "If I see you in my sight today, I'll order those extras to scare you." 𝐻𝐻𝐿 never placed a hand on him. Normally the two boys followed those rules, actively avoiding each other like the plague just as they expected. Until today. "Sounds like a pain in the butt," 𝐻𝐻𝐿 responds. Izuku begins to hear the slip of ferocity in his voice, the last few words that go down a pitch. His eye, the one without a white patch, wanders towards the face of the other boy and he sees nothing but a twitching brow and a mouth trying to contain a grimace. But if one were to stare into his sharp ruby eyes, they could see a small crack of an open door. A room full of fear and hatred towards a certain green-haired boy. They both know Katsuki's afraid of Izuku. They both know 𝐻𝐻𝐿 has never hurt Izuku because he fears his ability. How 𝐻𝐻𝐿 never wants to repeat the same thing that happened years ago. Instead, he uses his body language to portray the feeling of resentment. Because if 𝐻𝐻𝐿 makes him mad, if he makes him scared or somber, the only outcome could have yokai hurt the others around them. They could kill both of them. "Just remember that I'll do better than you. Whatever you get on the test won't be anywhere near as good as mine." Izuku understands why 𝐻𝐻𝐿 does this. Why he announces his superiority. Why he walks down the hallway opposite of Izuku. Why he orders the other kids to send a message through the worst words possible. He has every right to do so after what Izuku has done. He really does. But he just wishes he could live a day free of regret and resentment. It all starts in a tunnel underneath a bridge on the 7th block, only 15 minutes away from home and 5 minutes from school. Izuku feels the breeze of the annual winter as tints of summer try to unravel themselves from the snow. After all these years, it's every citizen's second nature to smell the dozes of the spring's petrichor behind the bitter ice or the autumn's more prominent earthy aroma overshadowed by the long-term blizzard. Everyone remembers the time when a single snowflake fell in the cities of Japan. It waltzed down towards Earth and did a graceful wave to the citizens amongst the country. It was the beginning of a new time. A time where snow began to layer itself over and over and over upon Japan, and it never once stopped until a couple of weeks later, repeating again after a few more. The streets and sidewalks suffered the suffocating white. Fields were damaged from the blankets of snow. No one knows exactly how the weather dramatically changed into annual winters, but they did manage to survive the effects it had. It surprised most people how fast humans could adapt to such a harsh environment. One thing stuck with the boy, despite the harsh winters beating against everyone's nerves, is the sound of the sleet crunching beneath his red snow boots and the shifting puffy jacket that he wore. After the interrogation with 𝐻𝐻𝐿, Izuku really needs something to distract himself. Funnily enough, the boisterous laugh he echoes down the tunnel is the least convincing imitation of All Might anyone could ever do. It isn't about how well he did it, however, but it's about how he perceives it. The symbolic hero that spreads peace throughout the country, the one that gives Izuku the confidence and hopes he desperately needs. It works. It doesn't work. At all. Self-deprecating thoughts eat at his mind. It's a battle to keep them buried beneath the layers of various emotions as they bounce across his brain's walls. Each message reverberates the thought with every ricochet. Izuku tries to laugh again, but all that comes out is a breathy and humorless chuckle. It never even echoes across the tunnel. The walls greet him with their subtle cracks here and there along with its weeds that call the crevices home. Wet gravel skids from underneath Izuku's feet, unsatisfactory compared to the snow's crunch from earlier. The strong winds gather into a concentrated line to fly straight through the tunnel. Izuku's hair becomes even more disheveled compared to how it was before, as tiny goosebumps begin to shoot shivers down his skin. All in all, it's not the most pleasant area to walk through. His vision waters when the cold air shoots daggers into his sight. It's somewhat refreshing, something he needs to clear his ugly thoughts. But he can't fall victim to his own emotions. He just can't. At first, Izuku thinks it's just the wind carrying a garbage truck's smell. Maybe a pile of rotting litter forgotten near the bridge. But a subtle stench becomes more and more distinguished, transforming into a stomach-churning smell. It's most likely the wind that carried it. Even though it stemmed from the manhole across from him. Only a few feet away. He never registers how fast it flings past his head and screeches across the cracked cement. The echo shoots into his ears, but his nose is having the worst experience. The smell was the most atrocious stench he has ever encountered. The mix of gunk that was coming from the sewer. Izuku doesn't have enough time to process the emerging wave of clumpy liquid. The figure that hovers in front of him, a haunting pair of eyes and a smile that scrunches together between sludge. It'll only hurt for a minute. He's overcome with a barrage of dark green. Sludge engulfs his body up into a tight hold, his clothes wrinkling and stretching by the criminal's muddy form. As soon as he feels the muck tighten around his skin, his mind goes haywire. His hands pathetically grip and pull against the substance, but the only response is a malicious laugh from a voice above. Izuku's ears are clogging. His mouth is being ripped open and forcefully being fed the vilest tasting thing he has ever had. The substance is lining down his throat and it's choking him. Izuku tries to take a breath, but then he feels like coughing, and then he has no airway to choke. His throat burns. His vision waters and blurs. Izuku's scared, panicked. He's dreadful. He feels his mind slip from reality. It slips down so far. At this point in time, the boy finally loses his train of thought and self-control. The gaping holes that begin to close from the vile substance block the bright shine of reality from the outside. He lets his mind grab a hold of his emotions. Each little drop of fear unwinds from his mind, rushing out of its cavern in a rupture of erratic sensations. Waves from despair initiate its takedown. This is the last resort, except this reaction will only put Izuku into more danger. And the villain in even more. Izuku recognizes the sludge villain's reaction instantly. The muck freezes up and stops its substance from going any deeper into his throat. The boy's reaction is to GG even more than before, but now the gunk slowly begins to exit his airway. He hates to admit it, but Izuku nearly feels bile escape his throat once the sludge fully exits. He doesn't even want to think about his breath. In fact, he never has time to because of the wavering presence of danger in front of him. The sludge villain's form reshapes and transforms in a disarray of muck. The disgusting substances waver, shaking in what seems like a feeling of outright fear. "What did you do?" The man screams. He moves his large figure of grease and slime to cower near the other side of the wall. His eyes are scanning his surroundings, searching for threats that could harm him in a panic. Why am I so scared? Izuku only coughs and wheezes up sludge as his own body trembles in the villain's similar emotions. His back hits the wall opposite of the villain, legs ignoring every message his brain sends. Izuku shivers. He's just as scared as the other. Don't speak, please, ack. Don't speak. Izuku warns. Make it stop. The yell rings down the tunnel as bright as day. Their waves travel through every hole in the wall and every crack in the ground. Please stop talking. You're gonna kill us if you keep on talking, just please stop. Izuku's heart thrums manically in his chest because this isn't good. He should just run. Just move his legs, but they aren't working and he can't move his arms. He's scared. He's so scared. He doesn't want the same thing to happen like years before. The boy can't stop projecting his emotions onto his surroundings. It's fear. Everywhere is the sensation of fight or flight panic. Izuku can't stop and he really wants to, he needs to, but he can't and he doesn't know how to. Crimson light. It glows from beneath the storm drain. The round opening projects the light onto the ceiling above them. And then comes the foreign stench. It's completely different from the sludge villains. It brings his disgusting smell to shame. The mix of putrid fader which crawls from out of the manhole begins to radiate off of a creature so horrific. The smells stain the insides of Izuku's nostrils, but more so his trachea despite the excess gunk that's left over from the villain and that makes him choke. Izuku reacts with and hacks each time he tries to catch a breath. His hands wrap around his throat in a form of comfort, but it never stops the distress, not once. Upon catching a look through obscure vision, he sees a canine-like monster with its back hunching over in a way that makes Izuku grimace. He lacks the knowledge to know if it's from the anomaly's bone structure or if it fought in battles it couldn't win. Bright red orbs scream at predators to keep out of its path. The fur surrounding its eyes is matted into groups, inky black substances acting like glue and trailing down its head and then to its back and belly. Their tail sways and twitches as if its bones have trouble flexing and moving freely. Soon it becomes ramrod straight. Izuku sees its chest contract and expand rapidly, its nose twitching in the air. The abomination twists its neck towards the pile of sludge and immediately faces it. With a haunting baritone growl, the vibrations sneak between Izuku's own bones and rumble down the tunnel. A low crick begins to fasten into a snarl so fatal, it sounds like it originates from every wall surrounding him as it tries to beat against the barriers. That's when Izuku sees its jaw expand. It unhinges like a snake and leaves a disturbing bellow throughout the air. The monster takes a merciless chunk out of the muck. And then another. Until there's none left. Disgusting. It's so disgusting and Izuku can't even defend himself. He caused the monster to sense him. He can't stop it. He can't stop anything. But a part of him, the part which is blurring during this moment of adrenaline and fear, is somewhat thankful for this outcome. At least he doesn't drown from garbage being shoved down his throat. At least he isn't eaten to shreds. Yet, that appreciation is crushed once he realizes the sludge villain is probably dead. The shock is still clouding his mind, including an oncoming migraine he feels, but never registers. How can he be a hero if all he does is bring disaster wherever he goes? Izuku doesn't realize the monster finishing up its meal and hopping back down the manhole followed by an echoing splash of sewer water far away down. He's not able to process anything after this point. Perhaps it's because of the tears digging along his cheeks or the obstruct coughs clogging up his throat even more. A burst of gunk comes out of his mouth from a painful wheeze. God damn, it hurts like hell, but he fights through it, at least until he actually sees the sludge in his hand. It's gross. His back rests on the wall as it lets out a small whump. Izuku leans against it, his head lolling to the side as he wheezes in and out. A patch and an eye stare up onto the dark ceiling. Spiderwebs flow in the cooling breeze as it traps excess leaves and tiny insects Izuku can't see. He coughs once more. He doesn't notice the wet stains on his cold cheeks when he wipes his hand across his face. The boy leans against the wall again. Wait. It soon hits him. That sludge villain was trying to capture his body in order to find 𝐓𝐻𝐻𝗋. Izuku's eyebrows raise in his revelation as his back lifts from the wall. It seems like the sludge villain did this out of desperation since they most likely don't know of Izuku's quirklessness. But the criminal is still trying to find somebody to hide in. Somebody close by. If that's the case, the villain could have the ability to capture that yokai. Izuku's gut drops again. That's when a voice in his head speaks after years of being pushed back. I have to do something. But he doesn't recognize that yokai. He doesn't know what it has in store and only an idiot would go headfirst into a situation they know nothing about. But he can't just let them go free. He has to find a hero. Where would he find a hero? No hero saved him when he was in trouble, so where would he find one anyway? He stares down at the storm drain as his mind ponders his next actions. Izuku only has one form of offense in his pockets, purified salt. Yeah, it's not the best thing, but it is a start. His legs lift him off of the ground with a bit of a stumble before he begins to wobble his way towards the drain. Izuku hovers above it with uncertainty he hasn't felt in years. I'm not useless. His eyebrows furrow, emerald striking with a new determination. I'm not a Deku either. He bends down and grabs the ladder that still stinks with the yokai's smell. Izuku grimaces. Slowly making his way down the bars, he feels each piece become more humid and cold. And then he looks around. This place looks nothing like Izuku thought it would. He expected a small and grungy sewer way, but this place looks so different. It's overwhelmingly large to the point where his footsteps down the ladder echo so far down the dark passageway. It obviously isn't a sewer, but a storm drain. The water is at least 3 inches as it rolls down the tunnel, carrying along the ice from his red boots. Wet paw prints paint along the dry sides of the circular cement. Izuku sees the trails run down the tunnel, and luckily for him, it goes down the brighter side of the passageway. Without question, the boy follows. He looks over his shoulder and shudders as he sees the gaping blackness behind him. Each step he takes reverberates down the tunnel. Sometimes his boot kicks the flowing water, the splashing echoing for a few seconds until it's lost in the void. The place is creepy to sum it up. Izuku can't even smell because of the sludge villain, but he also can't think properly because this tunnel is giving him some serious anxiety. Especially because of the multiple pathways to which the tunnel branches off to. This is probably a mistake. No, it most definitely is a mistake because he can see a slender man walking towards him. "Kid, what are you doing down here?" The man doesn't need to yell because of the exaggerated echo around them. As they get closer, Izuku can see his messy blonde hair and sunken bright blue eyes. His form seems a bit too skinny, unhealthily so. You didn't happen to see a sludge guy come down here, right?" Izuku manages to nod after a few seconds of hesitation a bit too violently. "Oh dear," the man's face morphs into an expression of worry. "It's too dangerous for you down here, young man. You should hurry up the ladder before something happens." "Wait, sir. I think I can help you, that is if you need help." Izuku stutters out. His eye pleads for the other man to agree, not really thinking about who the stranger could be. "Are you a pro hero? Is that why you're chasing after them?" "Yes, I am, boy." "What's your name?" "I'm Midoriya Izuku." "Wow, I never knew I'd actually meet a pro hero up this close." Izuku practically begins to mutter on and on as each word blurs within the echoing tunnel. The boy can't exactly get a grip on his situation through his starstruck attitude. Meeting up with a sunken man in a storm drain as they state their status as a pro hero just to get the middle schooler to follow them. The man pauses for a second as if he ponders telling him this information before continuing, cutting Izuku off. "I'm Yagi Toshinori. Are you sure you can help me?" "Why yeah, I know where he went, but I might seem a bit crazy." "Don't worry, Midoriya." His face turns into a comforting smile. "Quirks have they have their quirks." Toshinori chuckles at his own joke before following Izuku. He's unable to see Izuku's face falter a bit. They were standing side by side, the man falling behind a little due to the water splashing at his shoes. Izuku has to admit that it got a little awkward between the accidental water splashing and their situation as a whole. "What's your hero so, young man, what is your quirk?" Toshinori asks. Izuku pauses at the question, his posture faltering visibly. His head looks down to the side opposite of the man as he clears his throat awkwardly. I'm quirkless." He hears a sharp inhale as Toshinori pauses in his tracks. Izuku feels the need to turn his head around, but all it does is hang in a bout of shame. It's embarrassing. Izuku figured this whole thing was a mistake. "What? You could get seriously injured down here. I'll get you back to the ladder." Izuku finally manages to face the man, his focus darting to anything that isn't Toshinori. He prepares to open his mouth in rebuttal before a sound echoes down the passageway. Their dog yelps. It doesn't sound like your average neighborhood dog, but instead, it's a series of gurgled and pitched barks. Each cry gets quieter and quieter as if their body is slowly dying. Izuku's skin shoots goosebumps down his arms. He takes one last glance at Toshinori before sprinting towards the sound. Hey! Hey! Midoriya, don't be stupid, you could get hurt. Izuku keeps on running, the light source growing brighter and brighter before he rounds the corner and sees a room. 60-foot cement pillars stand on the ground and touch the top of the tall ceiling. Each pillar is wide in width and spread apart like an army of titans awaiting a god's arrival. Behind them are even more lines of the same structures that stretch farther and farther away. Large lights hang from above and light up the small pools of water below. The walls seem to guard the pillars in a protective stance while staircases lead up to the street above. It's something out of a piece of art. Izuku stares in awe at the sight ahead of him, forgetting the ominous danger he was chasing beforehand. He feels his boots walk ahead and shuffle towards the overhang. If he didn't feel the lack of cement below him, he would have fallen head over heels into a puddle of water. Actually, now that he studies the ground beneath him, he would have fallen onto the dead body of the yokai. Its figure lies lifeless in a puddle surrounded by goop as it fails to mix into the water like oil. The red that once glowed from inside now disappeared and leaves a canine-like creature with matting fur and a hunching back. A cough resounds from behind him. Izuku turns around to see Toshinori as he wipes his mouth with a handkerchief, a twinge of pain disappearing as soon as it came. It ignites a bit of fear and uncertainty towards the so-called pro-hero. The sludge villain went into that dog, the boy whispers cautiously. I think he's around here somewhere. Izuku concludes that the yokai's body couldn't withstand any form of bright light. The sludge villain must have wandered into this space before noticing the effects it had on his host. That was probably from the yelps earlier. Toshinori looks around until his eyes land on a ladder next to the overhang. He gestures towards Izuku before he begins to climb down. His shoes land on a subtle puddle of water, its sound echoing farther down the chamber. Once Izuku follows, the two of them walk to the yokai, Toshinori studying it with a disgusted curiosity while Izuku rocks back and forth on his heels. The itching sensation of anxiety trails down his neck until he has to walk around. Izuku tries his best not to be distracted by the pillars surrounding them, but he can't help himself. He makes his way over to one and traces his fingers along with the cracked cement as bits of fresh water run down the protrusions. Each droplet races to get near the ground, the subtle sheens of light illuminating off of them. A blob of excess slime stops the water from going any further. Izuku's brows narrow, the substance doesn't seem to move, nor does it seem like it was a part of the sludge villain. He is head to the side and examines his surroundings. Trails of muck dribble in certain areas, and just like the yokai, the goop wouldn't mix into the water. Izuku cautiously starts towards the trail as he tries his best to avoid any puddles. The muck seems to go farther and farther towards the wall. Dark spaces from underneath cement facades give Izuku a small chill. Midoriya? Toshinori suddenly asks a bit too quietly. Izuku looks over his shoulder and meets eye contact with a quizzical gaze. I hear water. We should head up the stairs. Immediately. The man's tone was so welcoming earlier, but now it's morphed into a sharp warning. Those words have the two on edge. It definitely means that they should get the hell out of there. When Izuku doesn't move, however, Toshinori hurries towards the boy and places his hand on his back. That's when Izuku feels those deep vibrations from underneath his feet. The noises of distant and low pitches soon merge into one booming sound of crashing waves against bottled barriers. The chamber sings the godlike chorus of water and it bursts into their ears. Run. They run like there's no tomorrow. The nearest staircase is only a few meters ahead of them and then their target would be final. Through all the blurring surroundings and adrenaline, Izuku notices a faint blob bolting up the stairs in a strained dance of waving sludge. It seeps through the numerous openings holding on like glue and then gliding upwards with ease. Damn it. Izuku's heart punches his ribcage open repeatedly through every rapid breath. He's almost to the slime-covered staircase. Hands reach out in front of him just to grab the rail, until he hears the heart-dropping flush of water throwing itself through the pipes. Despite his instincts scratching at himself to run, Izuku looks behind him to see the spread of water sprawl towards Toshinori. He's clutching his side. Instead of run, his mind pleads to save. Izuku sprints to the best of his abilities before his hand locks around the older man's wrist. He pulls him along towards the stairs, completely forgetting about Toshinori's pain. Their feet land on the first steps and then autopilot kicks in. Izuku never knew he could run upstairs so fast. Even as each turn up the next set gives the boy a twinge of anxiety, his legs never stop moving. Muscles begin to overwork themselves, sweat begins to form, but Izuku can't stop. Not until they're both safe. The waves fatally crash against the wall with a thunderous crack. He feels the against the metal around him once the water does the same thing to it. Luckily the slime is able to give both of them a sturdy footing, or else that odd twist of his angle would have had him falling into a sea of water. He's not even sure how far up he is until his vision begins to focus. The water's teasing them to slip as it's already risen halfway up the pillars and swooshes around in nauseating waltzes. Drops of water slide down his forehead and bring him back to reality. It's slightly refreshing considering his current body temperature, yet, as more begin to fall on his face the more he jogs up the stairs he realizes the open manhole above him. Rain pours onto his face whenever he goes underneath the opening, causing him to squint his eyes each time. When he's only a few feet away from the ladder he hears the taps of water bouncing against the staircase like pebbles. Midoriya, Toshinori. He's bent forward and holds his hands against his knees. Go on without me and alert the police. Why? I don't think that's a great idea. His back straightens as he tries to catch his breath. I don't think I'll be safe up there without a pro hero. Izuku is having doubts about Toshinori and his self-proclaimed pro-hero identity. Trust me, young man. Izuku's hand holds onto the ladder's wet metal as he stares at the other's struggling form. Be safe. I promise I'll get the police. It's strong not looking back when he climbs up the ladder. Even if it takes him longer than it should have due to the slippery texture. His hands grip against the molding lip of the manhole as he steps through. The first thing he notices is the disgusting amounts of sludge surrounding him. The rain morphs the muck with every drop, but it never even mixes within the substance. Izuku steps over it and analyzes the trails that go farther down the alleyway and then stop in a pile of mass before continuing. Excess amounts of sludge layer in the middle, strips of it thrown across the buildings as if there was a struggle. He shudders. Rain puddles splash against his boots once he follows them. It leads him down the street until crowds begin to gather around police cars and sirens. Izuku's heart grows heavier and heavier with every step he takes. Why are the heroes standing like pegs? There's a schoolboy in there. Do you think All Might will come back and finish it off? Come back. What's taking him so long then? The sludge villain and shuffles in between the crowds of people and fire. It stretches and enwraps itself tighter and tighter around a boy whose eyes scream louder than the flames around him. When Izuku saw those eyes he ran. He runs so fast that the overwhelming heat of fire blows harder than the bitter winds and rain shooting down the street. Heels crash down and carry the toughest strikes Izuku has forced upon his feet in ages. Each toe experiences the shock of strong pavement despite being protected by red and worn-out snow boots, and every second that the boy recklessly breathes in begins to PND against his chest. It becomes identical to his thoughts, their screams silencing into a reflex which bangs against his skull and pulls each nerve and each muscle just to go after that stupid boy. First, he throws his backpack. Then he throws his body. Hands claw at the sludge in erratic movements, his body thinking before he could. Deku. 𝐀𝐦 pleads. You're gonna get us both killed. Izuku never sees 𝐀𝐦 through his unreliable vision blurring with rain, but he hears every cry coming from his mouth. Please don't say it like that. Nothing will happen, 𝐀𝐦. Nothing's gonna happen and you have to trust me. The last time I trusted you was the last time I almost died. Izuku's hands hesitate for a second. Only a second before a whole new wave of motivation burns through his heart. Sludge begins to gather near his feet and work its way up Izuku's legs. He struggles to escape the sickly grasp which gives him a flashback to the feeling of being suffocated and strangled. Yet he still thrashes his hands through the slime. He doesn't want to stop, even when a group of it cups his arms and labels him useless. Idiot. You dumbass, Deku. It doesn't make Izuku feel any better that the heroes are doing nothing. Despite the rain corroding the sharp edges of fire into blunt candles, no hero seems to act. He's going to die, isn't he? He's had his chances before, but just like every one of his decisions, Izuku goes down the wrong one. I just couldn't leave someone who screamed for help. Kaken's face bellows absolute ferocity. A large hand grips Izuku's wrist. It doesn't seem like Katsuki's. A forceful tug yanks him from the muddy form and had him flailing in the rainy wind like a rag doll. It feels like his face nearly rips off of his skull because of the harsh pull of wind that races from behind him. The mud shoots forward as fast as a bullet, immediately covering the waving flames of fire. Izuku looks up at the large hand wrapping around his wrist and the glare of sunlight blinding the features of the hero. It's sunny. Izuku isn't expecting to see the same face as before. You would make a great hero, young man. Toshinori had found Izuku walking home in the rain. His green hair lies messily against his forehead, a hood nowhere to be seen. Izuku didn't think it'd storm this strong today. Really? His face stares up at the man in a ray of happiness, tears piercing at his vision little by little. Toshinori responds with a quick laugh before nodding, his blonde locks bouncing despite the barrage of rain. But, I'm quirkless, Izuku chuckles humorlessly, his throat constricting slightly. It's gonna be strong to become one. No negative thoughts. Don't think about them. I must say, I saw the way you ran after your friend. You risked your life for his life as well as mine. I see potential in, hey. Hey, are you crying? And no. It's the rain. Izuku wipes away the tears from his face, which is technically indistinguishable from the rain at this point. His nose and cheeks color with red once he notices a small smile grow on his own lips. It's just. I've always wanted to be a hero. Nobody has actually told me that I could become one. The boy's brows raise in the realization of what he'd just said. I mean, I know you didn't really mean it, potential. No one has said that to me. That I have potential. Izuku cringes at his oversharing. Toshinori looks puzzled. Izuku's phrasing is jumbled and difficult to understand, but he seems to manage. My boy, has anyone ever told you at all about any sort of potential? Izuku bites his lip and wraps his hands around his chest. Well, my mom has. But it just wasn't the type of potential I needed. The man hesitates and clenches his fists in inner turmoil. Izuku could practically see the gears in his head turning as he tries to produce some sort of answer. I may have something to help you become a hero. The boy's attention is automatically caught by Toshinori's words. The man makes his way to a bench on the side of the small pathway which stands underneath a roof. He sits down and adjusts his shirt, flapping the hem to wash away the rainwater. Izuku makes his way over and sits next to him. Life is funnier when you build a whole life that's so much more different than your youth. What do you kids call that? A blow up. A glow up. Toshinori nods, he rolls his shoulders and clears his throat as he leans back against the bench. Why do you want to become a hero, young Midoriya? His sunken eyes stare into Izuku's with an odd form of determination. Why do you really want to be a hero? Izuku straightens his back and thinks. His mind fills with a fiery passion before he feels the words finally climb out of his mouth. I want to help people with a smile on my face. That's all I really want. I want to save everyone that I can. Then he continues, on and on about how people have doubted him and pushed his dreams aside because of his quirklessness. He just wants to be a hero. He wants to save those who need saving, and that's what he'll do. And thank whatever was out there because Toshinori actually sits and listens. Izuku sees the sudden spark in the man's eye which makes him think. Why is this guy actually interested in talking to me? Why do you want to know more about me? Izuku cringes, Why do you find my dreams of becoming a hero interesting? I'm practically quirkless. Toshinori coughs into the side of his hand with an expression of surprise. Once he finishes, he puts his hand down and tries his best to smile. Sorry, I may have moved on to this a bit too quickly. The decision Toshinori looked like he was debating before is soon answered. The man clears his throat again and furrows his brows. Young man, do you want to be a hero? Yeah, he smiles awkwardly. Well. Toshinori's lips grow into a heartwarming smile, even through all of his sickly features. For some odd reason, it makes Izuku trust him. Toshinori stands up and puffs out his chest. What's left of Toshinori is a towering muscular man, all might. Izuku falls on the ground faster than Toshinori's, all might's, transformation. A splash of water soaks through his shirt, but it's not like it wasn't soaked, to begin with. It was I all along. All Might. Wait, no. This isn't right. The boy reaches into his pocket and tears out a small bag. He digs his hand into it and then throws a pile straight towards All Might. Ack! His hands rub the sticky crystals off of his face before wiping them on his legs in a panic. What the hell was that? Salt. This is real. Izuku stands up and takes a step closer towards the man as he puts away the bag. You're the real All Might. Oh my god, you're the real All Might. How is this possible? What happened to your form? Are you okay? I remember you were different when you saved Kaken and me from the sludge villain. Have you been able to do that this whole, now, young? Midoriya, there's no need to freak out. All Might rubs the back of his neck awkwardly. There's a reason why I'm showing you my true sides. Izuku walks home with a smile on his face that not even the rain could wipe off. He can become a hero. Izuku opens the front door, his hand slipping over the knob a couple of times. Once inside, he pulls his shoes off with the tip of his toes and carefully navigates his way through the apartment, carrying himself to the living room. He places his soggy backpack on the floor with an exhausted sigh. Izuku stares down at his school clothes as they stick to his skin uncomfortably, making his nose scrunch up in annoyance. Before he knew it, his stomach rumbles. Izuku heads out of the living room area and goes to the kitchen with a bit of a tired sway to his walk while he isn't aware of the water droplets he drags across the hardwood floor. All of those physical activities is something the boy isn't used to, and it shows. You're sick. His mother's voice whispers to a person he didn't know was there. Izuku peeks his head around the corner and sees 𝐴𝐻𝐻 sitting on the dining table's ledge. The boy expected 𝐴𝐻𝐻 to be talking to someone in front of her, but instead, she's holding a phone to her ear as she keeps a worried expression tied to her exhausted features. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 listens to the other line with such intensity that the rain outside of their window feels like harsh hail. Izuku shuffles slightly, moving his whole body around the corner with a concerned feeling in his gut. The movement catches 𝐴𝐻𝐻's attention. I'm sorry, I have to go real quick, but I'll continue this as soon as I can, she says to the stranger over the cell. His mom slides off the table ledge and rushes towards her son in a second. That worried face turns into one of relief as she cups Izuku's cheek in her hand with the renowned motherly touch. Izuku. I just heard about you on the news. What were you thinking? I am fine, Mom, there's no need to worry. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 wraps her arms around him and pulls him close. Don't ever do that again, pulling my heartstrings like that. She places her hands on his shoulders, leaning back and staring into his uncovered eye. Izuku could already see the rainwater dampening her clothes just from the hug alone. Years and years of living with 𝐴𝐻𝐻 make Izuku recognize this action, though. His mother just stares at him for a few seconds before sighing out all of her anxieties. Don't think I'm not proud of you, just don't ever do that again. She hugs the boy a second time with as much love as she can muster. Izuku smiles awkwardly through the embrace and tries pulling away with a bit of resistance until 𝐴𝐻𝐻 allows him to finally move away to face her. He unwraps his arms around her back and stares at the ground, searching for confidence inside the cracks of the wooden floor. I have a trainer, he stutters, for you. He sees 𝐴𝐻𝐻 place her hands near her mouth. Maybe it's in thought, maybe it's in shock, but he can't see her expression through his peripheral vision. Who are they? His name is Yagi Toshinori, he's one of the best of the best. Does he cost money? And no, he offered for free since Izuku cuts himself off. Since I kinda saved him. It wasn't that big of a deal, I didn't get hurt or anything. But I couldn't just refuse him, he seemed really nice, and the way to being a hero is to have respect for the ones that offer you stability. Plus, free training is okay, I understand. 𝐴𝐻's expression shifts to one of anxiety. It somewhat matches the one she had while on the phone from earlier. Just be careful, Izuku. Izuku smiles, his confidence finally found. I will. Through the rain pelting on their windows, they both hear a knock on the door, quiet and subtly gentle. Alarms go off in Izuku's head and he's sure it went the same for 𝐴𝐻. They exchange glances before 𝐴𝐻 begins to head towards the door with cautious footsteps. For a reason Izuku can't understand, a flash of the sludge villain came across his mind as if they would miraculously be by the door. The boy brushes it off as quickly as it came. Beforehand, they had sprinkled pure salt around their apartment's perimeter, but that never means yokai can't find ways to get in. Some are so small that they can merge their way through the crystals, some are even smart enough to decipher the sewer drains. But some yokai lack a hostile nature, giving them the ability to walk over the salts. That's probably how this one got through. 𝐴𝐻 peers through the peephole as Izuku holds his breath. What seems like minutes are only seconds, and thankfully 𝐴𝐻's shoulders relax. What is it? Izuku asks. You must be really thankful today, it's a tofu kozo. The woman unlocks the door and opens it with delicacy. These creatures are shy after all. Hello, what brings you here? 𝐴𝐻 uses her tone of voice meant for a young child. Despite how odd it might have been to talk like that to another yokai, tofu kozos were. They're kinda dumb. Hi. I don't know why the creature hunches over from underneath its large straw hat. It makes Izuku smile a bit due to its small height difference compared to how large the hat was. I think it felt night here, it says with a lisp. Tofu kozo never know how to keep their tongues in their mouths, Izuku concludes, that's why I wanted to bring you th tofu. 𝐻 very good. The tofu kozo pushes out his hands to reveal the small plate of food. Wow. 𝐴𝐻 coos. She reaches out for the plate and holds it in her hand, twisting her head towards Izuku and playfully winking before turning back around. It smells really good, you're a talented cutie, why no? The creature's adorable features morph into one of sadness. Their eyes look down at the apartment's welcome mat and they huff. That's not what the older one they think I'm worthless. 𝐴𝐻 gestures behind her back for Izuku to come forward. He does so and is able to get a better look at the tofu kozo. They're wearing an oversized blue kimono, one that was dragged throughout the rain with a few specks of mud. Its eyes are a deep and melancholy gray which makes Izuku want to hug the ever-living CRP out of them if not for that big tongue. The boy squats down to its size and in a reassuring breath. He then plasters on one of his brightest smiles to the point where he actually believes it. You seem like you know what you're doing. Don't believe what those bullies say, you're nothing close to worthless. Automatically, the creature's head lifts up as it grows a similar smile to Izuku's. Their eyes wear a determined sheen giving Izuku a sense of satisfaction. Guess it worked. You'll be safe out there, yeah. It's raining pretty strong, 𝐴𝐻 comments. 𝐴𝐻. I can do anything. The tofu kozo walks down the walkway with an adorable hop to their walk, disappearing as it rounds a corner. With a life so small, Izuku can see why dangerous yokai treat tofu kozos like trash. They're easy to manipulate, even with a sprinkle of his power. What do you want to eat with some tofu? 𝐴𝐻 asks. She was already heading back towards the kitchen. Izuku never realized how empty his stomach was, especially after everything that happened today. It's on you, Mom. I wouldn't mind anything, he smiles. First things first, though, she says. Huh. You need to change into something so you won't catch a cold, baby. Why do I have to hide it? Years ago, Izuku asked his mother this one night during omigatoki. The boy woke up in a cold sweat, a childish nightmare haunting his mind with corroding emotions crashing against his thoughts. Omigatoki. That's what they called it. The time when the sun fell and the moon rose up. When yokai stormed out of the woods and became nocturnal stalkers, waiting, praying behind the wall of salt surrounding their now snowed-in village town from years back. He remembers the woman looking into his good eye and lifting her lips into a tired smile. 𝐀𝐦 would caress his forehead with soothing motions in order to calm him down like she always did, and she would say, "Smile, Izuku. Just remember to smile and everything will be okay." 𝐀𝐦's voice trembled just as much as his. Katsuki wakes up to his alarm ringing in his ear. He shuffles his hand over the device and slams the snooze button before turning over onto his side. The warmth trapped in between his sheets and body is a stagnant pressure and creeps up towards his eyes. Although his eyelids are weighted with gradual fatigue, Katsuki can see through the window right near his bed as it plays a movie of the outside world. Street lamps shine through the fabric of the curtain and in between the sliver of openings until it finds itself bathing Katsuki's face with artificial light. The ground, something the residents in Japan never see as often, is covered in a thick blanket of snow. Insincere promises of bitterly cold air and wet snow boots hover over his mind. Katsuki doesn't really feel like going outside today. It's too cold. Real cold. He dozes off. His alarm goes off again. Ugh. The blonde inhales a whiff of the room's cold air as he stretches out his limbs. He winces once his foot pops out from underneath the covers and takes the blunt hit of freezing air, and that old hag should stop turning off my DMN heater. Ever so slowly Katsuki lifts the covers off of his body before tearing them off with newfound confidence. Brisk air wraps itself around him in a bittersweet embrace, completely replacing the warmth he desperately wants back. He slams his palm on the snooze button, turns it off in satisfaction before his feet find the edge of the bed. He plops them down as they then touch the frigid hardwood floors, groaning and wiping his tired eyes are his go-to right after. Carefully, he navigates his way to the closet, tiptoeing across his room despite his sore knees. Katsuki's calloused hand reaches out for the silver knob and grips it sluggishly. As he twists the object to the right, his arm pulls the door towards him as he feels the cool air bite at his body. Chilly. Katsuki blinks, shivers. He opens his eyes because the air turned cold. It turned very, very cold. It's too DMN cold. Shouldn't be this cold, but what stares at him from the back of the closet holds the coldest temperature in all of Katsuki's room. That creature's eyes are sunken to the point of a dark abyssal blackness encompassing its sockets. One eye is more slanted and downwards due to an abnormality pulling down its facial features on the right side. Its mouth flashes a line of disturbingly straight teeth and its body holds skin and bone to a concerning degree. Skin, as gray as the clouds that hover above, stretches through the uncomfortably large grin it had. The abomination's smile grows more than before. Until Katsuki slams the closet door and feels his body act before his mind can. Shuffling into the corner of the room, the boy digs underneath his bed and removes a bag. He practically tears it apart. Inside of it is piles and piles of purified salt. Katsuki holds it between his hands for dear life. The tighter his fingers dig into the crunching salt, the more he feels the rhythmic of his heart gnawing against his ribcage. His back aches with waves of pain coming from right near his shoulder. White flashes hit him repetitively and he knows that this pain was new. The hitching breaths he takes don't help either, in fact, they make his vision cloud with a hazy black. Katsuki. The hell are you doing slamming doors in the morning? The blonde flinches. His heart rate plummets to a normal pace, his breathing steadies, his eyesight becomes crystal clear. The image of that thing still flashes through his mind as a haunting set of chills shoots up his body. He hesitates and then gathers back his senses, which went swirling across the floor. And one of the loudest thoughts he hears are the ones cursing on Deku. That this is his fault. This is his DMN fault, he's why he sees these things everywhere. Crawling back onto his feet, Katsuki walks over to his closet. He hides how much he was shaking, the walls feel like they have eyes. Katsuki opens the bag of salts and readies it in one hand. He reaches for the closet's handle in the other. He opens it. He throws the salt and shut his eyes tight, almost slamming the door again. As soon as he opens his eyes, there's nothing. The air's warm. Did his mom really turn off the heater last night? Katsuki, what are you doing being noisy at 5 in the morning? Mitsuki's mixing a pot of food on the kitchen stove as it lets off the sweet smells of herbs and meat. Her hair, still cursed with bedhead, reflects the orange hue just peeking out from beyond their living room window. The way the light drapes down the carpet towards Masaru and Mitsuki weighs Katsuki back down into reality. A couple of minutes have passed since his encounter with the hallucination. It was nothing, just slammed the DMN door on accident, Katsuki grumbles as he makes his way to the kitchen table, his running shoes scuffing against the rug. He sits down and starts to place some of the food onto his plate before digging in. He doesn't even care about what's in his breakfast, it tastes healthy and spicy, which was all that really matters at this point. Masaru's on the other side of the table facing the TV as he eats. Katsuki can hear the channels change every so often until the man sees something that catches his eye. The news usually does the trick. You heading to the gym after this? Masaru asks. Like always, old man, Katsuki waves his lightweight jacket sleeve as if to show how obvious it is. The house falls into silence save for the TV and Mitsuki's cooking. The only time it really does this is in the morning when everyone feels the weight of sleep on their eyes. Now we're coming in with a new story. This much information involving the murder case in Yamanashi was allowed to be shared by the police, more will be released soon. About time. Katsuki's sure Masaru's only interested in the news to hear about the less fortunate. He figures that every good guy has to have their own mischievousness somewhere. A 34-year-old man by the name of Yamato Ito was declared missing after he disappeared from his cabin meant for a vacation stay. Inside, authorities found the bodies of 30-year-old Minato Ito and 2-year-old Hataru Ito. Many investigators believe the father is the suspect. The news reporter shares an unnoticeable weary glance with the other reporter before continuing. While exploring the crime scene, the bodies of Hataru and Minato Ito contained evidence of cannibalistic wounds most likely inflicted by Yamato Ito before he disappeared into the forest. Katsuki doesn't even have to lift his head to see both Masaru and Mitsuki staring at the TV with wide eyes. The food his mother stirs has stopped mixing together and the napkin Masaru uses to wipe that small speck of crumbs off his cheek has frozen in his hand. A cannibal. Mitsuki murmurs underneath her breath, "Do you think most likely?" Masaru shivers. The man stares at the TV for a few more seconds, rolling around in his worries and thoughts as his thumbs rub against each other. Soon enough, he lifts himself up and walks over to the stairs with heavy steps and says, "I'll bring a lighter and some more salt." His footsteps clog up the atmosphere as it's the only thing Katsuki can hear. "Katsuki," his mom calls from the kitchen. He hears a large amount of shock and anxiety woven between her voice. "I want you to stay here while he gets it for you, don't you dare try to ignore me." "I don't need a lighter," he protests from the table. "I have a quirk, you know." Mitsuki wipes her hands off with a napkin after turning off the stove, her expressions diving into a mix of veiled anxiety. That old hag really does try to keep her emotions under control, she just isn't that good at it. "You're taking the lighter, brat, I don't care what you say," she huffs. Mitsuki makes her way to the remote and turns off the TV before crossing her arms. "This isn't something equivalent to a villain attack, Katsuki. This is a Wendigo. I don't know what the hell is gonna happen, but I sure as hell will try and make you prepared." The boy shifts in his seat, brows furrowing in frustration. "I already know what it is." After a few seconds, he takes the remote control and turns the TV back on, curiosity grabbing a hold of him. Moving on from this case, farmers have recently been reporting unknown causes of death for their livestock. If you are sensitive, please look away until further notice. The reporter pauses, skimming their papers before looking back at the camera. A few seconds after, they show a shot of livestock with their skin, bone, and fur intact, thankfully, but the connotation that the animal is dead is clear as day. The farmers have told authorities about the strange wounds inflicted on their animals, saying they did not have the consistency of an average predator around their area. Scientists speculate that there are invasive species inside of Japan accidentally transported by boat or from another location. Whatever it is, it really does make you wonder, Chaudhary, the other reporter adds. Katsuki has already left the house after he retrieves the extra bag of salt and a lighter recommended by his mother. He tried to shake it off, saying he already has a fire-based quirk and that he can fend for himself once again, but Mitsuki is just as stubborn as he is. Deep in his mind, he knows she's worried, especially after that DMN sludge villain. As Masaru grabs the used dishes and places them into the dishwasher, Mitsuki has already stored the leftovers into the fridge and starts her way over to the couch. He sees her flop onto the cushions and twiddle her unkempt hair between her fingers. Her nails are painted as red as her eyes. What are we gonna do? She sighs. Mitsuki leans back onto the couch and tilts her head back. Most importantly, what are we gonna do with that boy? Masaru makes his way over to the living room and turns off the TV. Before it was playing something other than the news, thankfully. Placing the remote back onto the coffee table, he sits right next to his wife and pulls her into a sweet embrace, her forehead. Masaru then settles his chin into the crook of her neck and sighs. If anything, that thing won't come for us. I know it won't. Mitsuki unravels her arms and sits back, hands on his shoulders as she stares with uncertainty. We don't know that, she laughs humorlessly. I know you're just as scared as me, Masaru. We have to figure out another way to protect us that isn't just a bag of salt. We'll figure something out. Mitsuki looks down at the rug beneath their feet as she ponders what to say. And Katsuki, she pauses, I've been thinking about this and I think we should send 𝐬𝐽 into the forest once Katsuki turns 18. That's when she gets it for Katsuki. 18, why not 21? He can have fun for eternity, Masaru grins. Mitsuki laughs through her nose, holding onto his shoulders tight. Slowly, her eyes turn sad as her smile twists into a frown. It's gonna be okay, he says, wrapping her into a tight hug once again. This is the only way. He usually runs until his lungs feel like they would burst. Until his breaths feel like liquefying crystals lining along his airway. Katsuki has to push himself to become a hero, he has to push himself to become strong. That's because he isn't weak, he's never been weak. If you are, people will take advantage of you, and Katsuki's there to push past those shitty extras and come out victorious. So when that stoplight turns red and he has to stand still, he hates every second of it. Shaking his head, Katsuki levels his breathing and rolls his shoulders back. That small tugging against his left shoulder pinches him harder than it should have. He winces at the slight pain it brings him, travels down his back in a wave. The place where the pain comes from is new, but the sensation of it is something the boy is used to. Katsuki's back has a wound right near his shoulder, one that has sat there for most of his life, but never has it once inflicted this much discomfort. It brings him unwanted anxiety. There's no reason to worry about it for now. He has a couple of years until something might happen. Katsuki always makes his situation a lot more casual than it actually is. He's aware. He pulls out his phone from his backpack with a sigh, trying to exhale all of his worries away. Katsuki begins ding around with the screen until the light changes and he readies himself to continue. His red eyes glance down at his running shoes, just a quick glance. Katsuki takes another peek. He has to get a third look at the goopy sludge that slides over his shoes, apprehension crawling up from where it lies. He has to know where it comes from, why it's trapping his feet as it makes his heart rate thunder. Katsuki tries to move his legs but he feels stuck in the same sludge that has once trapped him only a few days ago. His eyes wander down the flowing lines of goop that spreads out across the sidewalk as his vision blurs the passers-by when they somehow manage to avoid the substance. Each movement of his pupils throws spikes of fear down his throat as he swallows the last drop of spit inside his dry mouth. The blonde expects to see the sludge villain waiting at the end of those lines, but all he sees is a dead end with dense droplets of goop falling overhead. He hears the silent crawling of pointed legs tap against the tower's glass windows above him. Katsuki looks up. A large spider. Black fangs, sharp and intimidating, protruding from its mouth. A colorful back that patterns of lines and geometric shapes twisting into a mesmerizing pattern. Each design's color dribbles a variety of sludge as it transforms into the green substance he knows way too well. Katsuki's frozen, his blood pumping adrenaline that tells him to run away, but he can't stop staring at the 𝐬𝐻𝐬. Illusion is its second nature, a deceiving tool to lure in prey. Yet, Katsuki asks himself through all those heart-racing thoughts, what is it doing here? Move it, jackass, some dickwad grunts, bumping against his shoulder as he continues walking along with the crowd. But, Katsuki manages to say through his clouding thoughts. He looks back at the sludge, but it's no surprise when the 𝐬𝐻𝐬 disappears just like that mother effer who watched him sleep in his closet. So the boy keeps running, his arms and legs shaking as he tries to run off the excess adrenaline. He has to say he's used to these encounters. Not to the point of being comfortable around them, the opposite in fact, but to the point of experiencing them very frequently. Without even noticing, Katsuki's speed was faster than before, but he doesn't have it in himself to care. Especially because his snow boots are sturdy when it comes to those slippery areas. At least, he thought it was sturdy until another idiot decides to run into him again. Today's not his day. Sorry, I didn't see you there, sir. A familiar annoying voice scratches against his ears. Katsuki tries to rebalance himself before he looks down to see a mop of SHT green. Kaken, the hell are you doing? He directs more than questions. Izuku's head hangs lower than any normal person's stature, his eyes skimming the wet pavement like it was the most interesting thing he's ever seen. I just gotta be somewhere important. At 5 in the morning. I have a teacher. At 5 a.m. Yeah, he plays with his pocket zippers. Katsuki stares down at this loser in disbelief. He can tell Izuku feels the weight of his gaze as he shifts from right to left in the snow, shivering in his puffy jacket. He technically isn't lying, is he? Out of the blue, Katsuki lends his hand down towards Izuku and shakes it in front of his face. That idiot looks up at him with an eye and then back at his hand. Izuku slowly raises his hand up as it hovers above Katsuki's palm. He hesitates. He remembers his therapist telling him how exposure therapy works. Approach him carefully. You can always walk away if it becomes too much. Just make sure not to hurt him. She always says. You know he never meant for that to happen. The boy grabs his wrist instead. Katsuki wraps his fingers around Izuku's arm and pulls him up with a yank, not seeming to care about the icy ground surrounding the two. The freezing air which bites at their noses dissipates after a few seconds due to the immediate warmth originating from Katsuki's palm. It's beginning to heat up around Izuku's skin. A surge of anger takes over Katsuki's emotions. It was an immediate reaction, he didn't really know what he was thinking. The feelings littering about his mind scream an odd mix of fear and aggravation. It's automatic, on instinct. He doesn't explode his wrist off, a voice in the back of his mind wants to. Katsuki only used his quirk to heat up the other boy's skin to the point of discomfort. A tinge of ignition is shot into Izuku's wrist. The boy's bottom lip endures a quick bite of teeth until Katsuki begins to talk, his tone low and threatening. Don't think I'm some dumbass. You have a trainer for UA, don't you? That's why you're out here this DMN early. Katsuki lets go of Izuku's hand with some force, a new fire inside of his eyes. I dare you to go to UA. Try figuring out what happens when you try to save somebody with that shitty little trick of yours, Deku. Izuku's pushed aside once Katsuki bumps into his shoulder, walking off with fury to his step. His boots crunch against the rough snow as he begins to pick up his pace, running down the path until turning a corner and disappearing. Izuku releases the breath he was holding as his vision focuses back onto the snow where he fell over. He rubs his hands over his jacket's sleeves, the sound of nylon rubbing against his cold palms. Finally growing a brain, as Kaken would say, Izuku starts over to a bench underneath a snow-covered tree. Slowly, the whole realization dawns on him as soon as he sits down, one that leaves him even more confused than before. Kaken tried to hurt me. Izuku stares at his arm, the discomfort finally melting away into a warm sensation. He has every right to after what I've done to him, another voice announces. A hint of red marks in the form of blurred fingers turn back into a peachy white a little while after. But why did he? Izuku figured out long ago that 𝐀𝐦 isn't afraid of him, there's no secret to that. 𝐀𝐦 is actually afraid of what Izuku can do. If you make one wrong move, say one bad thing, Izuku can attract yokai whether he wants to or not with his own negative emotions. So he has to give it to 𝐀𝐦. Izuku's scared of that part of himself as well. It's just that when you're scared of someone, you never try to hurt them. Maybe it was a warning, a long-needed warning, especially after the sludge villain. Or maybe 𝐀𝐦's done being afraid and snapped out of his fears. But Izuku's best guess involves 𝐀𝐦 fuming with irritation after what happened in their old hometown. It's time to finally stand up and give Izuku a taste of his own medicine. The boy shivers. Whatever the case is, 𝐀𝐦 tried to hurt him, and never in his entire life has he done anything like it. He has every right to hurt me after how I've hurt him. Young Midoriya, you'll only waste time in your own head, a deep voice resonates in front of him. Izuku looks up to see the slender man, his face a look of concern. Toshinori wears an earthy green jacket with brown puffs lining along the hems as well as baggy black radiating coziness. His blonde locks blow in the wind, hardly affected since his hair is already a disheveled mess in the first place. Looks like it snowed strong last night. Being sad can make you sick if it's this cold, can mess up your energy. All Might. Sorry, I was just thinking about something. Izuku gets up from the bench, grabbing his backpack and slinging it over his shoulders. He begins to walk with the hero side by side down the icy pavement. If only he can imagine his younger self gaping over this bizarre improvement, it'd be heartwarming. It's understandable if you're worried about inheriting my quirk, I know I was too when I first started training. The man says as he pats his back. You'll get used to it, but that's to say once you finally get my quirk. This workout is hell. Yeah, I can feel it. I've been going over it with my mom, she's actually getting a bit of motivation herself. It's really funny, these past few days of getting up earlier than before have been making her sleep schedule change too. And how is that going for her? Well, instead of making the food plan the night before, she's starting to wake up before me just to cook. Izuku rubs the back of his neck with a chuckle, she does way too much for me. That's what mothers are for. Toshinori smiles. A few moments pass filled with a comfortable silence. The snow creaks from underneath their feet and the freezing winds bite at their noses. The cars passing by blow the white flakes into the air, drifting down the road from the strong gusts. The two are getting closer to the beach since Izuku can see the tip of trash from behind a building. How in the world will he be able to move all the trash by himself? Say, kid, I have to ask you something, the man breaks the silence. Izuku manages to choke down his anxiety, he's not even sure why he should have it in the first place. Yeah. Do you remember that dog that was in the sewers with us? The one the sludge villain took over. Izuku's eyebrows raise, his heart in his throat. He hopes it looks like he had a realization to Toshinori instead of it actually being apprehension. Slowly, Izuku nods his head, fighting all of the weights trying to keep his body frozen. Why does he want to know about the yokai? Of course, he doesn't know about them, not a lot of people do. Maybe it's because of how the yokai looked. It was beaten up really, really badly. Was the dog like that before you found it? Poor thing looked dead, Toshinori murmurs. He brings his hand to his chin and looks into the ground for more answers. It's been on my mind since we first saw it. I've been thinking about finding its owner so we can turn them in. That dog looked like it was in pain. Oh, and no need to do that, All Might. Izuku waves his hands in front of his face in a slight panic. The dog was like that after the sludge villain took over. It was really messed up, I kinda saw him transform them into that. Izuku lies straight through his teeth. That was incredibly brave of you, young Midoriya. It's strong to believe a kid would have the guts to chase down a villain, especially through the sewers. Why yeah. Thanks for saving me. I don't think anyone should have to go through that. Izuku would be in deep SHT if they found out more about the sludge villain's capabilities. He doesn't even mutate his host's exterior at all. Hell, one of the reasons why Izuku went down into the sewers in the first place is because he's comfortable around yokai. Kind of. He's lived with them most of his life, so one can say that he's not exactly bothered as much as he should have been. That being said, if the authorities manage to dig more into the sludge villain's case and find empty spaces, Izuku could be questioned about the yokai. And I don't think the world is ready to uncover more about them. All Might had left in his smaller form with footprints inking into the snow. He told the boy that he had around 20 minutes until he was free to go. Until then he should keep on exercising. Izuku nodded and kept doing what he did best. Trying. He isn't sure what this box is for, or what that long faucet can attach to, but goddamn it's heavy. With the only light originating from the distant street lamps and the slight gleam of orange coming from the lip of the horizon as the day was soon coming, it feels somewhat like his hometown. Just a bit. It's probably the radiant flecks of snow gleaming into his sight or the singing bugs skittering beneath the ground, avoiding the harsh bite of the cold wind. It doesn't stop that unnerving chill from shooting up his spine as a warning to avoid the dark coves eroded into the walls of trash. He repeats to himself that he's okay, that everything is fine. Shuffling through the scattered patches of snow, Izuku inhales through his nose and feels the chill air bite at his skin. He exhales the warm air back into the open. His muscles are on fire, sweat gracing almost every inch of his body underneath the uncomfortable socks and clothing he wears. Sweaty hair bundles upon his forehead and neck. He already gave up trying to push them away. A small thump comes from a battered microwave behind him. It teeters a little before resting in an idle state once again. Izuku's brow furrows slightly. The boy's attention strikes the redundant case of metal before cautiously approaching it, one baby step at a time. Don't sense it. It can't sense you. Can it? Maybe it already knows I'm here. Is it a yokai? I should probably sense it. No. No, I should let this go. The microwave shifts backward slightly, scraping rust against smooth metal with a wincing shrill. Izuku stops in his tracks, analyzing his surroundings through the winter snow and the piles of forgotten junk. He continues towards the disfigured appliance, shuddering when a scratch sounds inside its walls. He reaches out with his shaking hand, when did it start to shake, and lies his fingers onto the cold decaying handle. Izuku shoves the worrying thoughts into the back of his mind. If it's harmful, it would have done something by now. Yet, despite his reassurances, each second passes by like a minute before his arm pulls back slowly. What are you doing? GH. Izuku falls right on his butt, snow soaking through his not a great feeling. The microwave pushes backward with a crash once a creature emerges from the battered insides, paws gracefully landing on the ground. The scattered snow perfectly matches the small limbs, yet the fur coat above their limbs is a pure midnight black, the complete opposite between the crystal white frost. Izuku stares at the dangerous creature, judgmental slits dipped in icy sapphire glares back. Their snout points with a narrow nose and upturned whiskers held high in condescending disgust. Ears stop to face Izuku and only him like he's the only subject the yokai has to be concerned with. Why Yura, don't stare like that, I don't want you dirting my fur. The flat voice growls, sharp ears flitting back for a moment. Their flexible body moves with such royalty as the mixed black and white fur shifts with ease. Lost lights in the city reflect appealing flares of orange and blue, masking into a deep purple and green the farther down they travel on their back. Then their one tail appears, lifting up with such pure motion from behind them. 𝐀𝐦. Bakaniko, Izuku realizes the lilt in her voice, a feminine trait. 𝐀𝐦 refers to the beasts of Bakaniko. We despise 𝐀𝐦. The boy never takes his eyesight off the magnificent being in front of him. She encompasses Izuku's sight, unable to steal it away. Thankfully the Bakaniko doesn't have two tails. If she did, then she'd for sure be a 𝐀𝐦. Take your eye off my tail, Cyclops. It's rude, she says monotonously. Why yes, sorry. Izuku stands up quickly, the faint dizziness disappearing as fast as it comes. Ears and cheeks run warm with blush and embarrassment. A Bakaniko, despite how small and cat-like it is, has amazing abilities. They can transform into any living thing, especially a human. Not only that, this type of yokai has the power of fire and necromancy. How welcoming. The yokai begins to approach him with delicate frosty paws digging into the snow. Their eyes shoot daggers into Izuku's skin, each prickle a judging observation about himself. Their only tail begins to carefully swing from side to side in an elegant manner. It was obvious she feels superior to all humans, so on that note, this 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 kinda reminds him of 𝐾𝐻𝐽. What are you doing cleaning up this place? She asks directs. Her voice doesn't express much emotion, probably because cats use their body to give off their language. This is where I find food. Ah. Why yeah, about that. My teacher, All Might. Have you heard of him? He's making me clean up the beach so I can train. Izuku tries to smile, but the way she looks at him like some type of toy strips him of all his attempts at being welcoming. And his back, it's stuck in a straight stature, a thing he learned in order to be polite to strangers, yet it isn't exactly working. This is a cat after all. All Might. I am here, fellow. What a bunch of nonsense. Izuku nods his head a bit too harshly, his hair flinging off some sweat before realizing what she had said. He shakes his hands in front of himself as his brows raise, wait, and no. All Might is an amazing hero. He's saved hundreds of lives. All I hear in these cities are heroes this, heroes that. You humans should get personalities. So boring. The 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 seems to roll her sapphire eyes as she saunters over to the pile of junk Izuku had stacked up high. Her charming movements seem to follow her everywhere she went, even when she jumps up and lands on a broken appliance without it tilting. The yokai continues all the way up towards the top, her fur reflecting the orange hue of the sunrise. Hold on, be careful, Izuku worriedly makes his way to the pile and stares at her from the sandy ground. Don't knock it over, please, I worked HRD on that. You worked HRD on this. She seems to knead the top of the pile with her paws mockingly, the junk wobbling ever so slightly. I'll give you food, I have some fish at home. Or maybe you want some birds. I know a place with a lot of birds. Just, please, come down from there. Humans never learn. So cocky and so annoying. The 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 gets on her hind legs, a rare sight to see when they risk the chance of getting caught, and begins to slowly shake the pile. You should never disturb a sleeping yokai, idiot. She makes one final push with her legs and it all comes down. All of it. The piles of junk and metal creak and scream a loud shrill of contact. Izuku can only stare as the slam of it falls down into the sand. Screws and shards fly into the air, some even catching into his hair, luckily none cut into his skin. The 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 jumps high into the air and lands on all four of her legs, the sand bouncing up around her from the contact. With a few kicks of her legs, she manages to get some of the dirt off of her fur as she then begins to strut right over to Izuku. Have you learned your lesson? Izuku gawks at the yokai, emotions bursting from the inside. His hands ball into fists while brows furrow in anger. The worst part of it is the fact that he can't do jack sht to the cat. She would just end up eating him. Or something. Touch anything on this beach and your head is mine, she states plainly. But out. Izuku looks around for excuses, vision searching the area for anything he can use against her. I'll provide you with food. Every day. He blurts, emerald widening once again at his own disbelief. You already said that, you roach, her head tilts to the side. It's obvious that she's losing patience. Izuku should quickly find some sort of bribe or else. I'll give you a home, free food until you want to leave. The boy looks around nervously as he places random things together. Puppets. I hope you realize that us 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 had owners before we ate them, she rolls her blue eyes. Although, on the terms of puppets, I'll only agree if you bring me a fresh yokai carcass every other day. No problem. He yells without thinking. 𝗍𝗲𝗿 a fresh yokai carcass. Did you lose your hearing when that pile fell? Give me one every other day. The 𝗍𝗃𝐻 sits down, seems to finally relax after Izuku's encounter. Her tail swings from side to side as the bitter air blows around her fur. It's so I don't get bored. And so I can kill you after a few months. She's so blunt. But my options are inevitable. If I go up to All Might and cancel my training, I won't inherit his quirk and this beach won't ever be clean again. On the other hand, I have this ticking time bomb of a yokai. Okay, he huffs as his face scrunches up in uncertainty, food, shelter, and yokai carcasses. Got it. If she tries to do something, Mom can just tell her to stop. Yokai always listen to her anyway. Good. Take me there. Alright now. I have to go to school right now. Izuku babbles. He walks over to his backpack, avoiding the smaller piles of disorganized junk as he picks it up and slings it over his shoulder. Can't you just wait here until I come back? I'm hungry and you promised me free food. There's food at school, so give me some. She begins to lick at her paw, eyes completely devoid of any concern. Izuku's mouth turns into a straight line as he squares his shoulders. I can't just take you to school, or whatever your name is, there are people who can see you, you know. The cat turns invisible. Yeah, okay, this is really predictable, 𝗍𝗃𝐻 can transform into anything, whatever. Yokai are just way too overwhelming at this point. Izuku's, thankfully, used to it by now. Geez, what did I expect? The boy murmurs underneath his breath. Paw prints seem to come from thin air as they march through the sand straight towards Izuku. Automatically, white paws materialize on top of the trails, and then the rest of the yokai's body follows. Alright, Izuku presses his thumb and index finger between the bridge of his nose, just hop into my backpack. He places the object back down onto the sand and unzips the biggest pocket. The 𝗍𝗃𝐻 looks up at him, a small frown of disgust, then takes a few steps forward into the backpack and sits down. You're leaving this one unzipped. You're not gonna trap me in this stupid bag. Izuku nods through her complaints and cautiously wraps the backpack around his shoulders. He lifts himself off the ground with a slight burn on his thighs. With a sigh, the boy walks firmly just not to disturb the 𝗍𝗃𝐻 because she's kinda scary with that burning stare on the top of his head. He really needs to find a way to make her leave him alone. It's strong to get accustomed to that intimidating glare, but Izuku manages to make it to the stairs and begins to start towards his junior high. What is this? It's the school lunch. You want some of the food here, right? This tastes like plastic. The 𝗍𝗃𝐻 visibly cringes in disgust, her ears flattening against the top of her head. She sits on the bathroom tiles with her tail swaying from side to side. Shaking her head, the yokai stands up and approaches the tray of food with new curiosity. Her nose wiggles as she sniffs the school lunch and winces once again. Is there even any real food in here? I guess you get used to it after a while, Izuku replies and sticks his chopsticks into the salad. He puts it in his mouth and chews the more than chewy meat for a few seconds. Doesn't even seem like it has any real fruit or meat. Humans have such an awful diet. The 𝗍𝗃𝐻 turns on her heel and makes her way out of the bathroom stall, nose turned upwards. You still owe me food. The flickering lights turn off completely, leaving Izuku in darkness except for the weak orange emergency lights. The boy almost drops his tray before shuffling it onto the toilet paper holder. Standing up, Izuku takes a few steps forward and walks to the stall door using the wall for support with his hands. Hey. This isn't funny, he utters. This isn't the first time this has happened. His bullies would turn off the bathroom lights occasionally. Please turn it back on. He peers around the stall wall and sees the exit door stagnant as ever. It would have been moving a bit if someone enters or exits, even if they stick their hand inside to turn off the light. Izuku looks down to find the 𝗍𝗃𝐻 staring at the door the same as him. Ugh! The sudden echo of a GG bounces into their ears. It comes from a few stalls down from his. The weirdest part is that it sounds like a girl's voice. Maybe someone was here before me. Damn it. The 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 looks up at Izuku with a heavy glare, the same thought on her mind he's sure. Yet, their eye contact is soon broken by a similar GG followed by a painful cough. A sob follows their wheezing fit as well as a few muffled murmurs. Hello? Are you okay? There is no answer, only the same couple of hacks. Izuku decides to exit the stall and follow the sounds that keep drumming in his ears. Their throat gets more scratchy and harsh after every step he takes towards the choking. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees the 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 blend in with her surroundings, her body going invisible before her legs follow. With a few more steps, Izuku approaches the open stall. A girl with long and sleek black hair sits in front of the toilet while her head hovers above the ring. He can see her shoulders visibly shiver and stiffen after she coughs into the bowl with violent hacks. Her hands wrap around the seat as she hangs on for dear life, nails digging into the white plastic like mad. The jingle of a rainbow bracelet makes a clinking sound as it occasionally taps against the surface. Oh. This is the boys' bathroom. Izuku proclaims while his hands wave in front of his face. He expects to see her turn around and become just as flustered as him. Maybe she would even apologize for their situation and he'd tell her to go to the office, perhaps he would walk her there. But the thing is, there's no answer from the girl. She probably ran into the boys' bathroom instantly because her matter was urgent. It's closer to the lunchroom anyway. Do you need help? Are you okay? There's still no answer. She doesn't seem affected by anything Izuku's sputtering out. The food. It had meat. She croaked out. It had meat. It had meat. Izuku tilts his head ever so slightly, his gears trying to turn with this information. The boy's unsure of what to do as he takes a step closer. Why, you must be vegetarian, vegan. I'm sure it was just a mistake. There's no need to think back on it too much. From his peripheral vision, Izuku sees the 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 manifest from her paws up. She jumps up onto his shoulder, which results in him backing up out of the stall immediately. Izuku wobbles on his 2 feet when he tries to catch his balance before he turns to the yokai, waiting for her to say something. 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽, she whispers. I'm guessing it didn't know the lunch had any meat. This is its mistake, it's just beginning to turn into one. His face falls. The automatic drop of weights inside of his stomach pulls him back down into reality. Ever so slowly his lips part while his lungs take in a sharp inhale. Emerald widening, scanning dim bathroom walls, faster breathing traveling up and down his airway, chill beginning to crawl across his skin. Izuku doesn't notice his legs walking back towards the sinks, but when his back feels the porcelain bump against him he's paralyzed. There has to be an explanation for this. 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽. 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽. Black magic. The girl experiments with black magic, that's it, that was it. 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽s are created after a girl breaks the spell of her transformation. After the ritual, she shouldn't eat meat for 40 days. She'll be blessed with eternal beauty for the rest of her life if she follows the standards, but if she doesn't, he can't take his sight off of her. He doesn't know what to do. There has to be something to keep her from transforming. She looks around, her head turning from the left and then to the right. The girl's desperate gasping echoes around the bathroom and digs deep into Izuku's skin. Anything. You have to know something. Break the mirror. Izuku's brows rise. He scans the sinks from behind him and sees his reflection illuminated by the weak orange lights. The 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽 sits on his shoulder with incredible balance, tail barely waving and eyes almost covered with full black slits. And no, I can't do that to her. Ending its life before it takes other lives is more important, she says between the girl's coughing fit. That's what you humans always quote. Izuku shakes his head and brushes his hands through his hair. He feels the yokai's whiskers ghost against his fingers. Her icy blue eyes stare at him through the mirror's reflection. You promised me a fresh yokai, anyway. The eye contact holds for a solid few seconds before the message finally processes. Izuku's guts twist more than the 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝐽's, his hands beginning to shake harder. Through the obscure lighting, the boy finds a metallic trash can near the end of the sinks. The sheen of orange highlights the sharp edges. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 jumps off of his shoulder and onto the ground, her stare observing his every movement as Izuku starts towards the trash can. He wraps his fingers around the cold object's corners and hurtles it over his shoulder. Izuku looks up and sees his stance, stiff yet trembling, unconfident. I'm really gonna do this. I'm seriously gonna. I can't do this, CRP, CRP, CRP. He holds onto the bin as if it's his only way of surviving. In this case, it technically is. I have to do this or who knows what she'll do. She'll turn into a yokai and I won't have the chance to stop this from A screech leaves the girl's mouth, a dry and grating inhale piercing through all of their ears. Izuku swings the container into the mirror. The resounding metallic roar reverberates across the bathroom tiles. The shattering glass clashes against each other and falls to the ground, exploding from the wall and extending outwards. Izuku drops the can and covers his arms over his face, eliminating his vision as shards of glass slice into cheeks and neck. A few seconds pass and the clinking near his feet has finally stopped. His face feels the small white sting of pain striking across the side of his cheekbone and, hesitantly, Izuku looks around and sees the cracked reflection of his pale face through the pieces of broken mirror. His arms uncover his sea-green hair and he looks up to see the dark bathroom stalls watching him. Izuku turns around and sees the spider webs of cracks surrounding the lost pieces of glass, each fragment missing from its counterparts. Through the neighboring mirrors, the rest of the stalls are on display. Each door stands deathly still, including the one the girl is in. Yet, Izuku can see her slowly rise from her sitting position as she stands up wobbling so uncannily. Gradually, the stall door creaks open revealing the rest of her body, her hands are closed into white-knuckled fists struggling by her sides, neck slowly twisting to her right, pick up the glass and go to the stall. The cat hisses. And so he does. Izuku bends down and starts to collect the glass scattered across the ground. They dig into his palms and cut them open, blood beginning to dribble in sync. Izuku winces at the stinging pain, but the adrenaline that pumps through his veins tells him to keep going, keep going. He scoops up the last shard of glass into his arms and stalks over to the bathroom stall next to the girls. What do I do? What do I do? Izuku scans the dim stall and sees the lip of the toilet glaring orange light from the walls. He manages to stalk up onto the bowl with one foot followed by his other one, almost throwing him off balance with the low groans the girl stifles out. When the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 detaches from its body, I want you to drop the glass into the gap of its neck, she replies. Izuku can't pinpoint where the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 is, but he can still process her directions. The deepest fear laces between his thoughts, screaming of looking down. CRP, he doesn't want to look down. Izuku looks down and finally sees the gory portrait below him. The girl's neck has twisted around more than 360 degrees. From this information, her head is already out of her body. Izuku doesn't want to remember how those sounds reverberate around the bathroom in a way that sinks deeper, not only into the tiles but into his ears. Along with the head comes her organs. They hang from her spine like apples from tree branches, each one swaying with every movement she makes while leaving her body. Yet, the most scarring detail of all is how silent she is when her transformation is finally complete. From his bird's eye view, Izuku can see her mouth open into a phantom scream while her now frozen hand tries to hold her throat down, the bracelet wrapped around her wrist reflecting the orange light lining against the stalls. And then the subtle of her heartbeat. The muffled vessels working together just to keep her alive in this form are mortifying. Her lungs take in breaths, expanding and then inflating with extraordinary effort. Izuku can hear everything. The glass almost slips out of his arms once he takes a tiny whiff of the abomination before him. Regret floods his senses, forcing him to breathe straight through his nose. Now! The strong shards of glass cluttered down into her hollow body and onto the tiled ground, against the strong surfaces and liquids. The cacophony of sounds grace her skin and hide inside of her long black hair. Izuku freezes as soon as each piece leaves his grasp. Despite the bathroom's poorly lit surroundings, Izuku can see and hear her turn around to face her deformed body. Her pale white face looks up to find Izuku peering above the wall. That moment of feeling the stone-cold gaze of dead eyes stare at him through the palpable dark, it etches into his skin and clothes and tears apart his mind. Over and over again the boy shudders into a shaking mess, those eyes of grief and agony crashing into his. He's so cold. It got really cold here, CRP, it is so cold. A flicker of flame reflecting off of the stall's wall, his sight leads to its warm embrace of heat into the abyssal black air. Legitimate light displays a black and white coat of fur and twitching cat ears beneath it. The end of the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸's tail ignites before she jumps off of the wall's corner and disappears in front of it with a silent bump. Only seconds later is Izuku able to see the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 waiting in front of the stall next to his, her lips receding to expose her long fangs. The boy is captivated as the flame rises higher and higher into a large campfire. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸's tail has grown twice its size, no. It grows 5 times its size, extending into the air while the fire will follow its size soon after. But, not only is her tail growing, the rest of her body is doing so as well. Along the obscure walls, the shadows begin to cast 2 outlines of monstrous creatures staring idly at each other, both orange hues merging together and pasting onto every perimeter along the silhouettes. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸, no longer the figure of a house cat, elongates seemingly to a human's hunched form. Scratchy fur lines over her deltoids and down her back and spine, nails as strong as steel manifest onto her smaller ones. The flames that were originally hovering over her tail are now conquering her toned back, her shoulders, arms, her neck. The yokai's face materializes a slightly longer snout with eyes similar to the fiery ones of lions. Each wisp of fire at the bathroom ceiling in uncoordinated dances of heat, plastic plaguing the air with its awful smell along with the hint of burning wood and iron. The boy has to duck underneath the walls before any flames could melt his face off. But down underneath the front lines hold the view of flickering shadows casting upon the tiles. Izuku looks up from his crouching position on the toilet to see the grotesque branches of organs attached to the girl's crying face twisting in pain. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 has shape-shifted into a 𝐽𝐸. Corpse-eating yokai whose shape stands taller than an average human. Fire dances on their skin as they scare not only people but yokai as well. 𝐽𝐸 can retrieve evil souls and snatch them down to hell, yet that's not why the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 froze in place. Her face morphs into one of pure and outright dread as the 𝐽𝐸 continues to rise above her deformed body. Its jaw extends to reveal rows and rows of terrifying teeth as they glare, dripping saliva along with the fire's orange glow. Baritone growls ignite from the 𝐽𝐸's throat, seeping deep into both of their bones. Out of immediate instinct, the girl fills with terror. She flies downwards only slightly and dodges the oncoming gouge of teeth. Flames scorch parts of her face as she screams, a sharp cry coming from her burnt hanging trachea, yet all of the adrenaline that pumps through her forces her to weave past the monstrosity and out of their sight. Once she reaches her stiff and hollow body, she flies above it and attaches herself back in, and the most blood-curdling scream releases from her mouth. Izuku holds down his ears with scarred and bleeding hands. He almost trips when stepping down from the toilet and onto the dirty floors stained with blood and glass. Fire sprinklers have finally set off, water spewing from above him and down onto his messy hair. Alarms blare hypnotically and dig deeper into his chest and eardrums than the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 ever did. But at least they cover her screaming. Izuku walks out of the stall and sees the trails of a charred ceramic floor littered across their area. His mind wavers between meaningless words and curses, erasing his common sense as he approaches the yokai. The flames from the 𝐽𝐸's back are dying down, and so does its form, shrinking smaller and smaller until the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸's shape begins to become recognizable once again. Her fire disappears and her tail waves in the air, shaking the smoke and water off of her fur as if nothing even happened. Izuku manages to choke out underneath his breath. His vision is already blurring with dripping tears as they merge with the falling water. He can't take his gaze off of the leftover glass, the emergency lights reflecting a subtle hue onto the walls. Izuku grips harder against his sides. We didn't kill her, we killed it. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸 gets up from sitting and walks over to the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐸's body. Thank God things are lining up for you. If not for the fire sprinklers and the alarm, you would have a big chance of getting caught. She stands on her two hind legs in such a natural manner that it kinda irks Izuku, not that he wasn't irked enough, to begin with. What are you doing? Izuku blinks. Necromancy. Stand back and don't look. The boy follows the yokai's directions and turns around. His shoulders hunch over to protect his hands underneath his arms. He can already feel the BLD spreading down to his stomach. The water from the sprinklers helps a bit, but for the most part, it only makes him more uncomfortable than he already is. Izuku shivers through the shower of water and scrunches his eyes closed. The whirring fire alarm pierces his ears. He can hear the shuffling of clothes and mumbles of nonsensical words. As soon as it starts, it ends. You can look now, the 𝗵𝗃𝐸 opens up. Just don't look above you. Why? Just wait a bit. Izuku overhears the metallic cling of the air vents open up and then close from beneath the blaring alarm. The sound of crawling echoes throughout the vents, disappearing after a few agonizing moments. Was that her? He takes his focus off of the floor drain as it engulfs the drops of BLD and water. It left. I took its uniform. It didn't have as many bloodstains, as surprising as it is, so you should wear this instead. The 𝗵𝗃𝐸 lifts up the black Gekuren and tosses it over to Izuku. He shuffles with the cloth at first before getting a good grip on it. Put your dirty one on the sink, I'll burn it. Through the dark, Izuku can still see the shiny buttons along the hems. The wrinkles that have formed around her body and hugged her in a warm embrace. He fists the cloth, nails digging into the fabric as a sob tries to escape his throat. Izuku squeezes his vision shut and takes a drawn-out inhale. He exhales a shaky breath. Taking off his ruined uniform, Izuku places the bloody attire on the sink and puts the new one on. The camera saw him. Izuku remembered. When he exited the bathroom with his backpack slung over his shoulder and a new Gekuren hugging against his chest. The fire alarm was blaring against the school walls and beat inside his chest. His hands, complete liabilities underneath his armpits, were concealed from sight because he did not want others to see the BLD that dripped down beneath his undershirt. But that wasn't the only thing he remembered. When the boy looked up from the doorway, a simple, gray, silent camera stared back at him. It hooked up onto the corner of the hallway wall while the screen watched him with a dull and glassy eye. The camera saw him. So Izuku took up a faster pace. His walking quickened almost to the point of running while his hands would stay underneath his arms in such an awkward manner Izuku was sure he would trip if he made one wrong move. Thankfully there were working sinks inside of that bathroom. He managed to get the BLD off his face and pretty much anywhere else, but his hands were the main culprit. He was sure those wounds would leave scars. The boy's green hair was a mess of water and knots with a few shards of glass. Each turn he took down a hallway would always kick off some excess water droplets, maybe even a bit of shard. But it all stopped when he completely forgot where he was going. Izuku looked both ways. This place was a maze. Where was the exit again? He ran back down the hallway from where he came in and looked out the windows. Students were already outside and in a collection of lines. That's why it was so empty around here. Izuku went along the main corridors. In a matter of seconds, he was able to find the stairs. His wet shoes sloshed down them as he occasionally skipped a few steps, yet Izuku was almost completely down the stairs until he saw another camera. All of his common sense was thrown away when he jolted down the stairwell and out the school's front door with a slam. And thank whatever was above that everyone wasn't facing him. The lines of students stood in order from class to class, their bodies facing the road parallel to the school building. His entrance was atrocious with the door behind him slamming shut and his mouth releasing a surprised yelp that no one even heard. "Abe, Tomoko. Have you seen Abe? She didn't come to class after lunch. Maybe she's around here somewhere, probably making out with her boyfriend." "Shut up." A sob had almost broken free from his mouth. That uncomfortable tug in the back of his throat had him almost weeping in place. That was her name. Tomoko Abe. Izuku decided to run home. He didn't even think about it, the boy ran behind all of the students and right towards the back end of the school. Everyone knew about this small gate, some would even try to sneak out of it and smoke or go out to the arcade. Was it kinda depressing that Izuku had never even gotten close to doing those things? While stepping through the small opening of the open gate, he thought that it most definitely was depressing. But another camera had seen him from the corner of the building. And for the nth time that day, Izuku ran with his heart beating in his throat, tail between his shaking legs. He sprinted full speed down the silent alleyway behind the school and out into the open. A quiet street had accepted his arrival and welcomed him to run freely down the sidewalk. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻, completely silent inside his bag, had shuffled around and peeked her head out. "You're dead. I hope you know that." Izuku didn't answer. His lungs kept on wheezing, his warm breaths painting a small cloud in front of him. "When they find out it was you, you've better run away." Izuku didn't even have to see that DMN cat to know she was smirking. He really thought that cat never showed emotion with her monotone voice. "You are one stupid hero." "I'm running home," he gasped as his mouth hung open like a bag in the wind. The world around him blurred the faster he got, maybe he even forgot where he was. Gosh, he was so cold, he was only wearing the school uniform and nothing else in these temperatures. Running home because need my mom. How could I have been so stupid? "Well, don't trip on the black ice," she mocked. Around him were the distant murmurs of cars humming down roads and winds flying between buildings. It was awfully quiet, not a single person in sight besides him and the yokai. Maybe in another world, this type of silence would bring him serenity, but now it could only make him jump on his toes even more. The boy got lost just like how he got lost inside of his own school. Izuku had to pull out his phone and find out where he was, afterward running down the street littered with black and dirted snow with loose cigarette butts claiming the piles of ice as theirs. He realized that he wandered into a sketchy neighborhood flooded with people in black jackets and mutant quirks, every one of their eyes observing the quirkless boy. Izuku had to trace back his steps. Not being entirely sure, he had to look behind him for a few seconds, believing that some gang members were chasing him despite that belief being so stupid at the moment. Even if they were, the exit for the alleyway was so close Izuku could taste the fresh air absent of smoke and stench. He finally stepped out of the cramped alley and discovered a new part of the city, one that was the complete opposite of the block before. Briefcases and sophisticated and smooth hands, phones on and soothing the holder, this place was wealthy. Rich architectural designs and working men and women dressed in tailored suits walked from place to place with sturdy postures and serious faces. The snow was as white as could be, some pushed to the side so passers-by could walk down the sidewalks with ease and reach their jobs right after lunch. This most definitely wasn't the path towards home. Was it? Cautiously, Izuku turned away from most of the people and reached deep into his pocket with a bleeding hand. He held it close to his chest and dabbled with a couple of the buttons before reaching the route. The phone was left with bits of fresh BLD on its screen. Turns out, he was on the right path. Izuku just needed to twist past these people and get home as quick as he could. Wow, the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 intruded on his thoughts, a lot of yokai around here. 𝐻𝐻. Izuku's reaction caught some bad looks. He blushed furiously before closing in on himself. They're everywhere. Who knew there would be so many yokai trying to adapt to human society? He felt her moving around in his backpack, her invisible form peering above the zipper and spying on every single person abroad. Izuku's brows furrowed as so many questions began to flood his mind. Are they harmful? Very. Seems like some just wanted to distance themselves from us, live life as boring as this. Izuku stared at the businessmen and women with their faces deep into their phones clicking away. Their heels clacked against the pavement announcing their arrival with LTHR boots and tall high heels. How can some of these people be yokai? Izuku-kun. A familiar voice asked. A mature, yet energetic person came to mind immediately and Izuku spun around in the air of relief. Aunt Mitsuki. 𝐻𝐻. Izuku figured she worked in this area, that was probably why it looked so well off. What are you doing out of school so early? Was it an early schedule? Mitsuki put her hand on her hip. Even though she obviously knew Izuku was a good kid, the woman seemed to have her own doubts. That was until her face faltered once her eyes landed on the scrapes littered across his face. Would it be better if he told her what happened? She knows about yokai just as much as the Midoriyas do, and she can get him some help for his hands, but he shouldn't put himself out there after what he's done. The boy held a long and suspicious pause. He scanned the ground underneath him while his hands shuffled the soiled shirt below his arms. I need to go home. I'm having some problems. Mitsuki pondered for a moment, her eyes then lighting up with understanding. She knew what this was about. Together they both walked to her workplace building, weaving between the crowds of blurred people. Can you stay in the car just for a few? She asked. Mitsuki started to unlock the doors and place her belongings inside the back seat. Why yeah, I can, Izuku replied, but do you mind if you can get some bandages? Bandages? Izuku took out his hand from underneath his armpit, his anxiety creating hesitation. He winced when the cloth stuck to the wounds as first, but they quickly peeled off. Holy 𝐻𝐡. She murmured underneath her breath. We're taking you to the hospital and no, we can't do that. Izuku blurted out. He stood in front of the car as Mitsuki was in the middle of closing the driver's seat door, her hand froze on the door's edge. The boy shifted in his spot and squirmed underneath her gaze. After a moment of the woman's disbelief, Mitsuki slowly began to walk over to the passenger door from around the car. She took a hold of the handle and opened the door as she motioned for Izuku to come over. Izuku obeyed and crawled onto the seat and sat down, mindful of the yokai in his backpack as he took that off and left it on the floor. You're gonna tell me what happened when I come back with bandages, alright? Mitsuki reassured. Her tone wasn't scorning at all, in fact, it was more calming. I'm taking you home when I get my things. Izuku nodded. Mitsuki held a bit of eye contact to exaggerate her confidence. Then she closed the door and left. As she began to walk away, Izuku could see her speed up her pace while winding between the groups of people with striped ties and poker faces. His reflection stared back at him through the window and captured the minuscule cuts running along his cheekbones and forehead. I can feel your emotions getting out of control, the 𝐵𝐴 commented. The cat was out of the bag. Sorry, I can't control it sometimes, he exhaled. Warm air blew from the heater in front of him. Izuku began to rest for a few as his chest rose and fell. I'm still not the best at this. After a moment, Izuku woke up and adjusted to the gray light bouncing from the storm clouds above. He turned his head and saw people gradually distance themselves from the vehicle. They felt anxious due to Izuku's leaking emotions. He's gotten used to this happening. You're not the best at what? Izuku looked down at the yokai with her icy blues flooding with curiosity. That was the first time he's seen her show some sort of interest. I guess I have trouble calming down. If his hands weren't as damaged as they were, he would have rubbed the back of his neck in embarrassment. Really? The 𝐵𝐴's eyes squinted with doubt, her icy blues gleaming even darker. It's not like everyone has trouble calming down. But on another note, why were you so calm when you met me? You seemed to know that I was a yokai. Izuku froze, his back tensed and brows lifted. What is she trying to do? The back doors were opened and Izuku's head snapped back so strong it hurt. Mitsuki was adjusting her purse and briefcase until they seemed secure. Afterward, she glanced at Izuku and raised her hand to reveal the bandages. I'll put them on you in a sec. There's no need to, I'm sure I can do it myself. Izuku, you can't even touch anything without wincing a bit. The woman rose up and put her hand on the back door. Besides, I don't think you know how to do this. The boy waited for Mitsuki to walk over to the driver's seat and open the door. She sat on the chair and adjusted herself before placing the scissors down and measuring the bandages. Izuku felt real bad. Kinda like a burden. Nevertheless, though, thank you for doing this. Anytime, she mused. Mitsuki grabbed the scissors and cut the wrap. Next time, call us, okay? It's dangerous. Izuku scanned the glove compartment, the windshield, his backpack, anywhere that wasn't at Mitsuki. "Oh okay," he whispered. Mitsuki gestured for Izuku to lend out his hands. Izuku dug his teeth into his lower lip and pulled them free, and it was like something from a horror movie. "I'm sure you know this will hurt, so I want you to bite on your collar if it gets bad." Izuku pursed his mouth into a thin line. He didn't want to use the girl's outfit. It felt bad, wrong. Yet he bit down on the collar, he bit down strong. And after an eternity, which was only a few minutes, she had finished cleaning the wounds. His palms were completely covered up once Mitsuki was done, and his fingers were thick with multicolored band-aids. He looked up at the woman with tears of pain dropping down his cheeks. Thank you," he felt guilty because he knew Mitsuki could sense his emotions. Oi, don't cry on me," she smiled reassuringly. Mitsuki wiped her hands on the napkins she grabbed from the back seat and threw the dirted cotton ball and trash inside of a plastic bag. "You're just like your mother." Izuku knew she was just as worried, especially when she looked at the boy from the corner of his vision. Her brows arched up only slightly, yet coming from Mitsuki that was something to be concerned about. "So what happened?" He placed his littered hands into his lap, staring at them intensely. If telling adults about your secrets was easier, then Izuku wouldn't be sitting in a cage built off of trepidation. So that's when he began to twiddle his thumbs and catch glimpses of faceless people going up and down the sidewalk. "If you don't want to tell me right now, then that's fine. I saw a pangolin in the bathroom." There was an uncomfortable silence. At least to Izuku. Mitsuki was most likely staring at him with bewilderment, or maybe she was still processing what happened, placing two and two together just to stare at his scarred hands and stiffen. "You broke the mirror too. That's why your hands are hurt." Izuku looked up slowly with the look of a guilty dog. There was no eye contact, none at all, so he lowered his head after his poor attempt and started to stare at his hands once again. "I didn't know what else to do," Izuku choked. There was nothing else to do. He felt the warmest and gentlest touch against his shoulder, warmer than his mom's. Mitsuki was such an interesting and loud character inside of her own family that he'd always forget how comforting she could be. "It'll be okay," a silky voice soothed. "We'll sort this out when you get home, all right?" A mop of disheveled hair shook in the air. Izuku nodded and tried so strong to smile. Even through the tears streaming down his face coming from the memory playing over and over inside of his mind, he smiled. Together they sat through the silence with the hum of a car engine providing them with company. On the way, Izuku was able to pick up the similar faces that Mitsuki and Katsuki shared. When they were deep in thought, their brows would furrow only slightly. Sometimes they would bite their lip on occasion just to add on to that. When it started snowing on their way over to his mom's house, he could see the slight change from deep thought to annoyance. "It wasn't like there was enough snow on the ground in the first place," she would say. Once they made it to Izuku's apartment, Mitsuki parked the car in the parking lot, snow crunching beneath the tires. Izuku could see 𝐀𝐦 waiting on a bench near the pathway, and that was probably because Mitsuki texted her when she was getting bandages. Through the window, he saw 𝐀𝐦 get up from her seat and immediately start over towards the car, her face covered in heart-wrenching nervousness. Izuku didn't have to sense her emotions to know that her gut was twisting tighter than ever. His hand pulled in the handle and pushed out the door as cold air seeped through the opening, his face with frigid temperatures. Red boots crunched against the white snow as he walked over to his mom. She cupped his face in her palms and stared up at Izuku with spiraling emotions inside of her green eyes. "What happened?" she asked through shaking words. He side-eyed the ground. "We should go inside." Their apartment was warm. Heaters were on and about with homely air circulating around the house. Each one took off their respective jackets and accessories, placing them on a coat rack along with their shoes tucked underneath a stand. Izuku walked over to the couch and sat down near the edge, his backpack placed next to him. It really felt like 20 was lifted from his shoulders. "𝐀𝐦, I'm gonna make you two some tea," Mitsuki said. "Oh, no, it's fine, you're welcome." She completely ignored her refutes and made her way into the kitchen. Izuku could hear the tea kettle clanking against some pottery before Mitsuki placed it on the stove. Shortly, Izuku felt 𝐀𝐻𝐭's arms wrap around his body. Her hands went up to frazzle his hair, some of it still wet from the fire sprinklers. She placed her chin in the crevice of his shoulder while her eyelashes closed. He sensed the feathery touch against his skin. Mom. Sorry, baby, I'm just worried. 𝐀𝐻𝐭 kept the embrace steady for a few more seconds. She inhaled weakly and then gave his shoulder a small reassuring pat. Untangling herself from the scattered boy, 𝐀𝐻𝐭 sat back down and unwrinkled her pencil skirt with a few dabs. Izuku didn't have to look to see her apprehensive gaze. I texted you about what happened in his school, Mitsuki started from the kitchen. He could hear the clicking from the stove and her footsteps approaching the living room. She glanced over the wall and began to walk over to the couch as her high heels knocked against the hardwood floor. Izuku, it might be strong trying to bring up those memories again, but try telling us what happened. Her blonde hair swayed when she sat down on the couch across from him. Shifting his hands inside of his lap, Izuku started bouncing his legs slightly in a fit of nervousness. The boy took a whiff of warm air through his mouth and lungs. He whispered, I went to the bathroom during lunchtime. But there was this girl, she was gagging into the toilet and that's when she started murmuring something. 𝐀𝐻𝐭's hand found its way onto his shoulder. You don't have to tell us everything right now if you don't want to. Izuku barely shook his head and continued to burn holes into the carpet. She kept on saying that there was meat over and over again. I think she was talking about the school lunch and then his school bag fell off the couch and hit the ground with a muffled thump. All of them drew their attention to the shuffling backpack on the carpet as its zippers began to unzip themselves. Izuku sensed the weight on the couch diminish as 𝐀𝐻𝐭 and Mitsuki both shot out of their seats and distanced themselves across the room. He paused. A cautious white paw had escaped the backpack and managed to sink its claws deep into the carpet below. It pulled its head out followed by its ears and arms. Then came the rest of its black and white body. She looked straight up towards Izuku. Then towards the others. Oh, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 𝐬𝐿, oh yeah, oh, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 𝐬𝐿. The hell are you doing here? Mitsuki defended. You know each other? Izuku asked. And no, I don't, 𝐀𝐻𝐭 paused. She started approaching the yokai with sudden trepidation. Is that a 𝐵AKUNIKO? What's it doing in your bag? Izuku's back straightened as he focused on the cream walls around them, his heart starting to pick up a bit of speed. While his hand began to rub the back of his neck, his weight awkwardly distributed to his other foot. Then back again. When I was training. I thought since you were great at conditioning yokai you could have stopped it from bothering me, but... Can you stop it from bothering me? Conditioning. The yokai blurted. 𝐴𝐻𝐿. The only conditioning this woman does is by announcing her relationship with Hisashi Midoriya. Palpable silence erupted into the atmosphere. Hisashi Midoriya. Izuku turned his head towards his mother. His eyebrows were scrunched together in confusion and maybe even a pinch of betrayal. Mom, what's that mean? You haven't even told your son. The 𝐵AKUNIKO quarreled. She gradually backed away from the crowd and inched closer to the patio door. Her voice began to waver and her s's sounded like hissing. Izuku found it quite grating to his ears, but that was probably the point. From the corner of his eye, Izuku could see Mitsuki wrap her hands around a broom and lift it up to her chest. While the 𝐵AKUNIKO kept her steady pace towards the door, all three of them knew what the cat was going to do. She would break the glass, God knows what she'd do after. The tall high heels against the wooden floors came from Mitsuki and her running start. She swung the broom above her head and aimed for the yokai. Red eyes seethed as her arms struck the broom down strong. The yokai bounced and jumped away. She weaved around the furniture and kicked the carpet up with sharp nails. The boy quickly stepped onto the couch once the 𝐵AKUNIKO sprinted in his direction and took a sharp turn. She raced underneath the table, Mitsuki almost snagging her tail with the broom as it disappeared below. Come back here, you DMN cat! Mitsuki roared. She flung the broom back behind her and aimed it at the yokai. Paws pattered down the hall and straight towards the front door with a fiery determination. Until Mitsuki threw the broom over her head and hurled it at the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐽. The spiraling broom froze in midair. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐽's icy blue eyes widened in realization. It seemed as if a moment passed before her mind was able to put together what was happening. 𝐻𝐻 yokai, an old spirit residing inside of a broom. Usually, people own them as a measure for good luck, a way to keep away the bad spirits. Get that yokai out of here. Mitsuki pointed her index finger. The broom seemed to grow a mind of its own, the strands of hay-like material swaying in the air as it bolted towards the cat. Izuku could have sworn he heard the swipe of air pass it thwack. The 𝐻𝐻 slammed the 𝗵𝗃𝐻𝐽 onto the front door with its thick strands. The door whipped open and gusts of wind blew down the hallway, taking the cat with it and blowing it outside of the apartment room. Izuku could see the yokai recuperating on the entrance mat until the front door closed on its face, a resounding slam echoing throughout the house. Just like a feather falling, the broom gently placed itself on the floor without a peep of sound and the house was once again quiet. Quiet. It was very quiet. Izuku held his breath waiting for anything to break the deafening silence. With a bag of nerves whirling inside of his stomach, Izuku turned his head to see 𝐴𝐻𝐽 staring in shock, her hands covering her mouth as if to cover a frightened gasp. It wasn't a shocker once she did gasp because the tea kettle began to cry. Their heads turned over to the kitchen and Mitsuki was the first to act. She went ahead and entered the room. Izuku could hear her mess around with the stove before the whistling stopped. That's when the nagging against his skull became clear. The question biting on the insides of his lips wanting to be free. The boy faced his mother and opened his mouth. You told me Hisashi Midoriya left. 𝐴𝐻𝐽 lowered her eyes and held her hands together. She opened her mouth but closed it soon after. He did. He left when you were 4 but he had a perfectly good reason. That's not what you said, Izuku retorted. The silence enveloped them and suffocated them into a pit of uncomfortable emotions. Trembles resided in the palms of his hands. You said he left in the middle of the night because he couldn't handle a kid. 𝐴𝐻𝐽 turned her head towards the kitchen and was met with reassuring red eyes. With the small amounts of confidence she had breathed in, 𝐴𝐻𝐽 rubbed her thumb over her other hand and looked up once more. We both decided that it would have been the best option. Hisashi had some problems that, she took in a shaky breath, that would have been better off dealing with alone. Why couldn't he have just stayed here and gotten help? Izuku's fists clenched without him realizing it. He felt his emotions getting out of hand. It leaked like colorful aromas from his head and suffocated the room. He really didn't mean for this to happen, but sometimes he just couldn't control it. He just couldn't control how well he could harness his empathy because, in times like these, everything overwhelmed him. He shouldn't have run away, he said. He should have stayed here. He should have helped us. Izuku, he helped us by leaving. His bottom lip wobbled and tears prickled across his vision. Izuku's eyebrows scrunched together. They arched up. Droplets of tears finally rolled down his freckled cheeks as his hands rubbed against the wet smudges. Through his blurred eyesight, he already knew both Mitsuki and 𝐴𝐻𝐽 were affected by his emotions. They, too, were beginning to cry. How? He croaked out. Sniffled. How did that help us? Mitsuki eventually came out of the kitchen and started. You aren't the only one with your ability. Your father had it too. By leaving he was able to stop more things from hurting us. Izuku didn't know what feelings were swirling around in his gut anymore. Each sensation dropped weight after weight after weight and he didn't want it anymore. He peeked over his hand which rubbed away the tears and spotted his mother walking closer. She felt what he was feeling. Her arms opened and wrapped around his small frame. She held his head in between her neck and shoulder and, in time, Izuku wrapped his arms around her as well. He wanted a hug so bad. He wanted to feel warmth after a day of cold-heartedness. I am sorry for yelling. I'm sorry for yelling at you too, baby. His eyelids opened and let in the soft light of his bedside lamp. Izuku groggily scrubbed his under eyes and stared up at his popcorn ceiling. What time is it? Lifting himself up into a sitting position, he reached over to grab his patch from the table and wound it around his head. Izuku adjusted it over his left eye and then looked around his room to see the dark night sky outside his window and the alarm clock that read 3:27 a.m. Mitsuki went home after she made the three of them dinner. She knew 𝐻𝐻𝐿 was mentally drained once the whole confrontation ended and, bless Mitsuki's heart, managed to make sure the two of them were as comfortable as possible before she left. After that, Izuku took a shower and went straight to bed until finding himself here. He picked up his phone which lay next to his clock and began to read the list of news updating the recent villain attacks. His finger kept scrolling until his email popped up with a school notification reading, "We are sorry for disturbing your children's education, but the school will be cancelled for the following 3 to 5 days. Slowly but surely all of Izuku's memories flooded back when he continued reading that email. His hands began to shake and his stomach grew knots with every passing second. It came to the point where he couldn't handle it anymore. Izuku's feet were quicker than his mind was when they ran all the way to the bathroom just for Izuku to throw up all of his lunch and dinner into the toilet bowl. Hands gripped onto the edges for grounding. Toes squeezed together against the bath mat on the floor. For a few seconds, all he did was stare into space. His breath came out in unpredictable patterns as his chest rose and fell above the bowl. "You look troubled." Izuku twisted his head over to the bathroom door and saw the black and white 𝐻𝐻𝐿 sitting with a tail swishing behind her back. Blue eyes dug deep into his skin and bone. "How? When that but kicked me out, she didn't know I couldn't escape the salt circle. When you entered the lot you kicked a bit of salt to the side of the pathway, but I guess some of the wind blocked it off over the past few hours." She lowered her head in a frustrating defeat. "I'm stuck here until someone moves the salt. Permanently." The boy pulled down the lever and closed the toilet lid as it all flushed down. He crossed his arms over the top and laid his head down with an exhausted sigh. "Daemon, he was so tired. Why did you help me if you were only trying to kill me?" The 𝐻𝐻𝐿 only stared at him with her wide eyes. "Who said I helped you? I was only trying to get more bodies to use." She looked around the bathroom, the warm lights shining down her coat. "At least I was before I realized you were the son of 𝐻𝐻𝐿 𝐬𝐿. Now I'm stuck in this stupid salt circle with a bunch of idiots. Even if I kill you I wouldn't be able to do jack sh about it." Izuku relaxed his hands and let out another lethargic sigh. He cringed at the smell. "Who is Hisashi Midoriya? Who is he really?" "Your father." Yes, I know. But why do you act so afraid of him?" Izuku slumped in annoyance. "I can kill you right now and you wouldn't even feel it." He knew he just hurled all of his food for the day, but now he felt like there was more in stock. Izuku's heart skipped a beat and he almost fell off the toilet lid, cold sweat gripping around his neck. That's the type of fear he instills into all of us yokai. He's evil to us, but a hidden savior to you lackluster humans. She began to lick her paw in boredom. Izuku sighed in relief. He's made it his destiny to murder countless of yokai in order to protect your people. Chose the wrong side, if you ask me. Chose the wrong, he trailed off. Is he a yokai? He's part yokai. I didn't care too much to remember, but his father was kind of like a dragon. Not your typical fire-breathing, flying monstrosity, but he just had a lot of its features. That's probably where my abilities started. That means Izuku pushed himself from leaning against the toilet seat and sat down on the rug. Gradually the realization set in and his eyebrows raised. Green emeralds shot towards the 𝐻𝐻𝐿 and they reflected her image against his only eye. I have yokai BLD. He saw the roll of her blue eyes. Your mother's an idiot for keeping you from this for so long. Don't you think? It would have been better if she told you already. You're acting like a moron. He could also see why he thought the 𝐻𝐻𝐿 reminded him of Kaken. But on the flip side, why would his mom hide the truth from him? What sort of consequences awaited him if he were to already find out? If I have yokai BLD, that probably explains why so many of them surround me instead of people. Izuku hesitated and thought up a storm. This is all because of my ancestry. It's self-explanatory at this point, idiot. The cat stood up from her sitting position and waved her tail lazily. And that promise we made about feeding me. I'm hungry after all of your unnecessary family drama. Why yeah. I'll make sure to get you something. The boy gingerly stood up and made his way out of the bathroom and down the dimly lit hallway. His pajamas cloth shifted together while his bare feet shuffled against the wooden floor. It was cold against his skin. Yet, over time, each step got timidly slower until they came to a complete stop. Izuku gazed into the vast emptiness of the pitch-black living room with only the moonlight brightening a small patch through the window. A dimly lit orange street lamp beamed through the glass and gave off a subtle transition of light tracing along with the couches and walls. Silent hums coming from the heater filled his mind with static. The mirror hanging beside him reflected the bouncing orange onto his ever-paling skin. His breath hitched, he was stuck, he couldn't move. He couldn't move. His heartbeat quickened. All of a sudden it was difficult to breathe. Hands. Don't step on the glass, don't touch the glass. Please don't. Don't cut your hands. I can't see, it's too dark. Just don't think about it. Backing away from the murky scene before him, down the hallway and into the bathroom, Izuku averted his eye contact with the mirror and ran his fingers through his now dry and clean hair. The Bakeneko followed him through the doorway and tilted her head in impatience. Why aren't you getting food? Not tonight. Izuku readied the toothbrush and began brushing his teeth. With a few occasional stares into the mirror, he searched for a girl's pain-contorted face with blazing eyes screaming for help. He only found the hallway walls and towel racks inside the reflection. Thankfully. Once done, he spat and washed his mouth, turned off the lights and made his way into his bedroom. He left the door cracked. He didn't want to feel trapped inside of his bedroom. When the flames rose from its back and scorched the ceiling, it was like a wall of fire keeping him captive inside the bathroom stall. There was no fire inside of his bedroom, so why did it feel like flames could arise at any moment from now? Ignore it. Just ignore it. Remember that awesome fight that happened around 6 o'clock. Kamui Woods was incredibly smart when he tangled up that villain while dodging its attacks. Just ignore it. All Might was saving 12 people today in the span of a few hours, that's super impressive. 12 people. Just ignore it and go to sleep. The room number is 411. Down the hall, you'll find the elevator. You'll know where to go after that, the receptionist said with a charming tone. She glanced down at their badges for the third time, a quick look at Tamikawa's fluffy ears, then back to her computer screen. After all of his years working in the police force, Tsukachi knew of those facades people would put up in order to appear innocent and trustworthy. This woman put up a whole cement wall full of the words "fake" written in Sharpie. The men ignored her plastic persona and started their way over towards the elevator, Tsukachi pressing the button and yawning into his hand. Tsukachi, Tamikawa began, repeat the information again. I forgot a couple of the details. The kid we're heading to is named Izuku Midoriya. His middle school had a fire break out in the boys' bathroom and he acted out some suspicious behavior right after. The thing is, we're not too sure about his relations with the fire, maybe it was a late-blooming quirk, a potential kidnapping that he just got in the middle of, or a backfired partnership with a plan to kidnap someone. Tsukachi rolled back his shoulders, a quiet crick in his bones. Either way, he's hiding something that's vital to our case. The elevator dinged and opened its front doors. They walked in side by side, Tamikawa pressing the fourth button as their reflections bounced off of the metallic walls. If Midoriya did team up with someone, their quirk would most likely be related to teleportation, yes. But in the end, we're not entirely sure which situation is the correct one. Midoriya doesn't seem to have anything on his juvenile record, a clean slate. No connection to Abe Tomoko either. Tsukachi heard the man's bell strapped around his neck beginning to jingle, his fluffy head nodding up and down through the wall's counterpart image. And the girl, Tomoko, were there any new updates on where she went? Unfortunately, no, Tsukachi said, after the cameras picked up on her crawling out of the vents and into the bushes, we weren't able to follow any more of the BLD trails. If Midoriya teamed up with somebody, then it'd be expected for his partner to teleport her to their whereabouts. The doors opened and Tsukachi led the way down the gray walkway. He counted until 411 came into view and he knocked his knuckles against the door. Grabbing his hat, he took it off and dusted a few specks before placing it back on his head. Soon, his back nudged the railing and he relaxed his weight against it. "Coming." A woman's muffled voice called from the inside. The door peeped open and her green eyes glanced through the crack. "Hello, are you perhaps 𝐴𝐻𝐻 Midoriya? My name is Naomasa Tsukachi and this is my partner Sansa Tamawaka." They lifted their badges. "We've come from the police department in order to question you and your son." Oh my," she whispered. "This is about the fire that broke out at his school." Tsukachi nodded. The woman, 𝐴𝐻𝐻 Midoriya, shut the door and managed the lock before opening it once again, this time a lot more than before. "Come inside, make yourselves at home. The living room is just right up ahead. Would you like anything to drink?" "A glass of milk would be nice, thank you," Tamakawa replied. The two of them took off their shoes and started their way towards the living room, settling on the couch. Tsukachi looked at Tamakawa. At first glance, this house didn't seem that suspicious. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 was kind and caring, the air was peaceful and at the very least, comforting, even to strangers. He wondered if that were to change soon. "We would like to interview you first, is that fine?" 𝐴𝐻𝐻 looked back at them from the kitchen, she seemed to have bags underneath her tired eyes. Nodding, her green hair bouncing up and down, 𝐴𝐻𝐻 said, "That's fine." Not long after, the woman strolled towards the living room with Tamakawa's beverage. "I also forgot to tell you that my son isn't here right now, sorry," placing the cup on the table right before sitting down, her hands nervously fiddled with her shirt's hem. "The good news is that he's heading over right now, I apologize for the inconvenience." "That's perfectly fine, Ms. Midoriya," Tsukachi said. "Anyway, how long have you been living here?" 𝐴𝐻𝐻 seemed to look up and stare in thought for a few seconds. "A bit over 10 years. It hasn't felt that long until I actually say it out loud." She gave a short chuckle, definitely trying to calm her nerves. "And feel free to call me 𝐴𝐻𝐻, there's no need for such formality." "𝐴𝐻𝐻, don't worry, I understand. I've been living here for half my life, and sometimes it's strong to comprehend," Tsukachi smiled. "Your son, Izuku Midoriya, how has he been doing?" "Oh, he's been keeping up with his studies. He's really motivated to get into his dream school." Her face appeared to falter for just a moment. Maybe it was an area they should dive into, or maybe just ignore it completely. "What school does he have in mind?" "UA. My baby's very passionate about getting into the best school there is. He's such a strong worker." Just from a glimpse, it was obvious that she cared about her son. The way her eyes lit up and the slight quirk in the corner of her lips. "That sounds like a big dream, I'm sure he can reach it." "What's his quirk? Is he trying out for the hero course?" "Izuku is quirkless," she let out a tired sigh, her legs crossing at the ankles. "I'm sure he'll get into general education, though, he's a smart boy." Coming from his mother as a truth instead of a lie, the late-blooming quirk theory could be erased from the possibilities. "I'm sorry," Tamakawa mused. He stopped his writing and looked up at her with sympathetic eyes. "It's no problem," she tried to smile. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 picked herself up while Tsukachi thought of any other questions just to lift the mood. "What are your son's friends like? Do they come over often?" "Ah, his friends," she looked out the window and into the patio from her seat. "I believe he has a few acquaintances, but none of them are close enough to be coming over. He keeps himself busy by doing school work and reading." "Has he met anyone new recently?" Tsukachi believed this was a good path to go down if they wanted more information on the possible kidnapper. Over time, though, her mouth tightened lightly as if she was contemplating this question. "No, not that I know of," she answered. That short-lived ding inside of his head told him that she was lying. If Izuku's mother knew about his connections, then they could manage to trick up their words and get an answer out of her. But, why was she lying in the first place? The lock on the door wobbled before it creaked open to reveal a mop of green hair. His hand pulled the key out as he entered the apartment room, a pair of shoes being slipped off and slid underneath a stand. "Mom, I'm home." Tsukachi saw the boy luster a smile towards his mother. That was until he saw the two of them sitting behind her. His smile fell into parted lips looking out with unease and curiosity. Now was the time to introduce themselves. "Hello, my name is Naomasa Tsukachi and this is my partner, Sansa Tamikawa. We were called over here to interview you and your mother about the fire which started inside of your school. Are you busy in a few?" "And no. Not at all," the boy gave a small smile. "Just call me over when you're done, I'll be waiting in my room." Intervening their conversation, a sudden buzz went on and off. Inko dug her hand into her pocket and took out her phone. She stood up and pointed at the device. "I have to go take this, sorry. Izuku, maybe you can take the interview while I answer this." The boy from down the hall took a while to process her words before his widened in realization. Nodding, his backpack found its way to the floor and he nervously stalked over to the living room. Once Inko was out of the way, the boy sat down while his mother's bedroom door slowly closed, leaving a small click throughout the atmosphere. Looking back at Izuku, he noticed the minuscule change of his stature and how he hunched his shoulders just slightly. It was odd, but at the same time, he did seem like a reserved kid according to his mother. Adding on to that, Izuku's hands were littered with bandages and band-aids that Tsukachi could only guess were from the broken bathroom mirror. Before Izuku could introduce himself properly, Tsukachi interjected. "You already know why we're here, I'm sure." He saw Izuku's head gradually nod, his focus on the table instead of the two officers. The man readjusted his position and sat more forward than before. His eyes and ears were open and already analyzing. "Midoriya, explain why you ran away from the crime scene without telling anyone. Were you scared?" Izuku's fingers, wrapped around his arms, had tensed up while his shoulders hunched a bit more. It seemed like he acknowledged his inescapable consequence, but what was there to do about it? With bated breaths, the boy closed his good eye and scrunched his brows in concentration. Slowly, he started to put his thoughts into words. "If I did, then I would have gotten caught. I didn't want people jumping to conclusions. I was really, really scared. It's understandable to run away because of conclusions, but next time I trust you to talk to the authorities. They are reliable and are able to take it into their own hands." Tsukachi gave him a reassuring look, strong and bold eyes telling the boy that he was okay. "Moving on, what made you scared?" What made me scared? It was Abe Tomoko." Tsukachi wondered why that was the truth. "I was worried about her." "What would happen to her?" Take deep breaths, alright. You're doing fine. Now, why was Tomoko scared? The man furrowed his brows softly. Izuku didn't seem like he was releasing a lot of information. Did he not want to share or was he forced not to share? She was, Izuku trailed off. After a few moments, the boy didn't open his mouth to speak or to take in a deep breath. What was he thinking? She hurt herself. Tsukachi inhaled the thick air and exhaled his puzzlement. These subjective answers weren't leading anywhere, they only showcased Izuku as a bad liar. It was time to lay down the unpolished questions to get rid of this facade. Did someone kidnap Tomoko? There was no sound from before, nothing that soaked through the atmosphere, but now it seemed like the silence drained the atmosphere from out the windows. Izuku's mouth was zipped tight, yet his face drew pictures of dilemmas. Only a couple of awkward seconds that seemed like minutes passed by before Tsukachi caught the tiny nod the boy gave him. Yes. The answer was completely true. Thank you, Tsukachi replied. If you can you tell us about how she was kidnapped? I don't know, Izuku lied straight through his gritted teeth. I just don't know. I don't know. The boy's palms landed on his forehead as his spine curved over. Fingers laced through messy curls that only seemed to be getting even messier the more they went on. A beat of noiselessness ran through the home's halls, as well as an unfamiliar touch of anxiety rooting through his mind. If he focused strong enough, he could notice how the idea of crying seemed appealing. His thoughts were broken by a muffled sniffle coming from right in front of them. Izuku was on the verge of tears. "Sorry for pushing you too far, you don't have to proceed if you don't feel comfortable," Tsukachi ensured. He lifted himself off the couch and reached into his trench coat's pockets. His hand grabbed the handkerchief from inside and pulled it out, handing it to Izuku with a delicate apology. Thank you. If you don't mind, may I ask you just one more question before we leave?" Tsukachi kept his ear out for any noises until he finally heard a choked-out "yes." The man turned around to check in with Tamikawa. His whiskers twitched and so did his bell once he nodded in silent approval. Tsukachi glanced back over towards the boy, his hands off of his face as they idled near his chest with the handkerchief scrunched into a ball between his palms. "Are you in contact with the kidnapper?" With eye contact, Izuku stared at him in a fit of apprehension. "And no. I'm not." Ding. It would be easy to differentiate a bad liar from someone who only tells the truth. Although this boy seems like the type to be on his best behavior, it was obvious that he was both a bad liar and an honest person. Izuku lied about his connection and his encounter, but it was such a conflicting sight to see when Tsukachi knew he didn't mean any harm. In both his mind as well as Tamikawa's, they had to figure out which driving force was constraining Izuku. But just how would they do that? Sweat gathered on the tips of his skin, hot and uncomfortable as he rolled tires around the snowy ground. He kicked the black RBB once it fell down with a thump. Glancing over, he could see the sun peek over the ocean's horizon, bright and orange and the usual. Day after day, Izuku saw the same image over and over. Heard the same sounds of metal on metal, car after car, an inhale then an exhale. 6 a.m. The day of the entrance exam. The day Izuku had been training for. The day he had been a bundle of nerves shaking in the sand. And the day in which, he knew, would suffocate him. Along the beach's entrance were the few piles of trash stacked high above the cement. Some swayed with the wind while others branched into sturdy structures capable of withstanding the weight of a few people. One thing missing was the stench that Izuku remembered lingering around. Now it had surrounded the trash piles, toppling over each other on the cement while keeping the rest of the sand clear of its existence. Yet, no matter how strong he tried to ignore it, the gut-churning realization he had was that the beach still wasn't cleaned. He was always busy hunting yokai for the cat. That's why he couldn't finish. Izuku had to fit in sessions with the Bakeneko in order to find yokai for her to use her necromancy on. On the luckiest of days, it would have taken him 15 minutes. The longest had lasted for 3 hours. Those hours could have been used for homework, sleeping, training. He was ready to get rid of her. That was also another thing he was looking forward to. With no need to train and stack piles and piles of garbage on top of each other, the Bakeneko wouldn't have to knock one over as a type of threat to keep her around. But if she came back after Izuku would kick her out of his life, who knew what she would use against him? He had a feeling it would be a lot more worse. His head hurt. The familiar burn in his legs echoed throughout his body as he touched his toes. It was faint after months of training and Izuku internally gave himself a small victory. Yet, when he stared at the mountains of trash he assembled, that victorious feeling went away. Izuku didn't finish, he couldn't finish. He wasn't ready. Straightening out his back, the boy looked around and saw the golden locks of hair fluttering in the distance as cold winds veered past their body. The approaching figure came closer until All Might was finally in front of him. And those eyes, although dark and sunken, spoke more than just that of illness. He knew Izuku wasn't ready, and it was up to the boy to take that strong truth from the person he looked up to the most. Izuku glared at his own shoes, they were still and frozen beneath him, like the snow and trash surrounding the two. "Young Midoriya, you've done well," Toshinori started. He was flabbergasted. And underneath those words lied the disappointment Izuku couldn't bear to hear. The man's eyes scanned the structures of metal and junk. The ocean's tide beat against their ears. "But I'm afraid it's not enough. Why haven't you followed the training regime?" His shoulders hunched over only slightly, it seemed to protect Izuku from the imminent rejection. His mouth had parted a second ago, but a small peep of air had passed his lips. His vocal cords weren't working, neither was his cognitive thinking for that matter. If you skip out on your training, you won't become a hero in the future, young Midoriya. It's important to stay on top of your schedule, your responsibilities. Is there something happening that you're not telling me? Toshinori's face softened. He was worried, very, very worried, and Izuku couldn't tell him a thing. He couldn't let his emotions get a hold of himself. Was he really this much of a burden? He let down his trainer, and not only that, the legacy of All Might himself. A few seconds passed and the man took a step closer. A rush of fear raced throughout his veins. Don't let it in. Don't let yourself feel down. The boy could only shrink into himself more. Maybe out of pity, out of trepidation, out of grief because his future was now sabotaged. He whispered. What was that? I'm sorry, Izuku croaked. His tears began to sheen in the rising sun. I'm sorry I haven't been truthful. The silence hovering about the two completely blocked out the water next to them, the wind rustling their hair, the cars zipping past the beach's entrance. He managed to flick his sight towards Toshinori's eyes, a small glimpse until he couldn't hold the short-lived contact anymore. I want to be a hero, I just can't. Too many things clashing, too many things keeping me from doing what I want, so I just can't. I know one can doubt themselves, but I won't allow you to use the word can't because I know you can, young Midoriya. You've shown yourself over and over with your strong work and courage. And even if I can't pass down my quirk to you at this moment, we still have until next year, no. Both their mouths and brains stuttered for a moment. The hum of car engines drove by softly. A second. Sorry. I am sorry, he flushed. You won't understand. It's a me thing, he humorlessly chuckled. Izuku could tell he looked pathetic, hopeless. He shouldn't take it out on All Might. Izuku's hands wrapped around his biceps and pulled himself into an artificial hug. It wasn't warm enough. Without a goodbye, he backed away from Toshinori. He grabbed his bag and stumbled towards the steps, silent paws imprinting themselves into the snowy sand right behind him. Izuku hadn't had enough time to clean the beach. He didn't garner enough strength to inherit one for all. The fork in the road, in which he was racing towards through sweat, blood, and tears, was blocked by a fallen tree. There had to be another way. A detour, perhaps. He could go off the path and around the obstacle. But right now he just couldn't take that step. The boy found his usual public shower and lathered up the dirt and sweat as it washed down the drains like the blood in glass. He dried off and went on his way. To where? He wasn't sure. The thoughts of school, of the rumors that spoke of him and Abe Tomoko. Damn it, throw in the Bakeneko threatening his own future. It's like everything was crumbling away and he was right in the middle of it. It's all so funny because he hadn't even reached his peak in life. As if he would have had one in the first place. Izuku found himself situated outside of a cafe after walking in thought. Despite the hurricane of words being thrown around inside of his mind, he figured a drink of coffee could help him out, cool him down and warm him up. The bell's chime rung above his ear as he entered the humble atmosphere, warm browns and cream whites greeting him delicately. Large windows spread to the floor and up towards the ceiling. There were no signs of dark corners anywhere and it smelled of pure coffee and sugar. Heading towards the short line, he then said his order and sat down near the windows. The sunrise shined its rich pink and orange lights far into the cafe, its initials engraved into the plate's reflection and wooden floors. Izuku's backpack joined him on the seat next to his. And then the cat came along right after. He could see her invisible paws stepping on the napkins to let him know of her presence. All for nothing. How sad, she whispered. It was difficult to hide his aggravation behind the soft cafe music, but Izuku managed to direct it towards his clenching fists beneath the table. If it weren't for you, I would have gotten one for all. The boy took a deep breath through his nose and let the air out through his hushed words. You planned this, I know you did. What are you trying to do? I'm really just trying to get puppets, Roach. This doesn't concern you. The 𝗵𝗃𝐬𝐬's voice moved towards the window, a pause. Funny how you think you fit into everyone's puzzle despite how insecure you are. Izuku shut his mouth. But now you've got the entrance exams. What do you plan on doing? He thought about it. He's thought about this before. Without a quirk it was impossible, he realized over time, especially without support items. Izuku was stuck in the same place he was stuck in 9 months ago. What would he do? Punch enemies with his bare hands? He had to get into UA this year, he had to, or else he wouldn't be as successful as All Might wanted him to be. I don't think there's anything I can do. Izuku felt her sly eyes glare at him. I have an idea, but you're not gonna like it, the 𝗵𝗃𝐬𝐬 started. He could hear her sigh and felt the wind from her tail swaying. His full attention was captured. I could possess you. No. No way you're gonna do that. I can find another way that's not that. What other ways do you have? Where are you gonna get the amount of power a quirk user has in just 2 hours? I'm not letting you possess me because I know what you're getting at, the boy seethed. The chances of the 𝗵𝗃𝐬𝐬 never letting go of his body after possessing him was obvious. But deep inside him, he knew she was right. She was his only choice left. If things got out of control, 𝐬𝐽 would take notice and maybe she could ask his dad for help. His dad could stop the 𝗵𝗃𝐬𝐬 if the time came. He was Izuku's backup. It was a risk, but maybe it could work. Maybe he could get into UA. And when the time comes, Izuku could explain everything to Toshinori. Everything. I've got a T for Midoriya, Izuku. The nameplate placed above his assigned seat caught his gaze. Slowly, he edged himself down the aisle and sat on the chair. Situating himself and putting his backpack down, along with the cat inside of it, the boy took a long, deep breath. This was a place he never actually pictured himself going to. Despite all of those times telling himself that he can do it. He can be a quirkless hero, they were always clouded with a series of doubt and belittlement. But now he could erase the thoughts of inferiority and focus on his dream that lied in front of him. Izuku couldn't help but smile behind his hand, even if it was short-lived. Around 300 to 400 kids gathered inside of the auditorium, each one chatting with their neighbor or twiddling with their phone idly. Izuku didn't see Katsuki approach the seat next to his, but once he did, the boy tried to leave the blonde alone. It was one of the only ways to respect him, he supposed. So you're actually doing it, Katsuki sneered. Izuku hesitated, his thumbs twiddling in his lap, unexpecting of his comment. Why yes. He heard Katsuki click his tongue before looking forward, a dent in his brow. Shitty Deku, stop being so DMN happy, Katsuki complained. His sharp eyes stared a hole deep into Izuku's head while his pen twirled around his fingers. You know, this isn't gonna be your future. Got that? Ah. He let his emotions seep out. He couldn't help it, though. Izuku was sure that Katsuki was feeling the same sort of happiness, with or without his ability to affect his emotions. He could see the blonde's lips thin and let out a huff of breath. Red eyes locked back onto the stage awaiting any signs of announcements. His pen drummed against the desk, foot bounced beneath the chair. Katsuki was usually restless once he got happy, so Izuku should try to keep his emotions at bay for now. You better not attract anything, Katsuki murmured. Once the lights turned off and the spotlight shined down, their voices stopped altogether. The crowd waited for any type of movement, a radio announcement, anything. Then the heavy pair of boots stomping onto the stage carried an eccentric man spreading his arms wide across. A large grin set upon his face accompanying a unique spout of hair shooting up from the back of his head. It was Present Mike, welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say, hey. Their voices stopped in dead silence. And when he said their voices stopped, he really meant they stopped. The whole auditorium was deafeningly silent save for the silent buzz of the spotlight or that one random cough everyone despised. How could they ignore the present mic? Yeah, maybe Izuku was silent as well, but that was because everyone would look at him if he spoke up. That'd be awkward. Well, that's cool, my examinee listeners. A subtle tap on his shoulder caught Izuku off guard. He almost swore out loud if it weren't for his hand clamped against his mouth. Concealed whiskers brushed against his cheek, the sudden weight upon his shoulder belonging to the now sitting Bakeneko. Izuku felt her tail flick parts of his hair around with a gentle swish. "Gee, get off of my shoulder, I'm trying to listen." From the outside, it'd look like Izuku was muttering nonsense to himself, which of course, he kinda was. "I'm here to present the guidelines of your practical. Are you ready?" "Yeah." "I'm here to see what is going on," the Bakeneko nonchalantly whispered into his ear. "Take it easy and don't move." Izuku shifted uncomfortably before setting his eyes back on the enthusiastic man in front of him. And was it quite a sight to take in? Ever so slowly his mouth began to voice his idolized thoughts of the amazing hero. From his unique hair to the podcast Izuku had listened to every week, he never missed a single one. He was completely lost in thought. "And you, with the curly hair." Izuku shifted his attention towards the standing boy in front of him. He was intimidating with his upturned eyebrows and sturdy structure. Their glasses gave off that cliché look of intellect, and Izuku wasn't sure if that helped or worsened his intimidation. "You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting." Sorry." Izuku clasped his hands over his mouth. Heat gathered in his face and he truly felt like he was on fire. It was too embarrassing. It also didn't help his situation when a subtle glance from the blonde resulted in a small mocking chuckle. Why does he always make a fool out of himself? What a try-strong. So annoying, the Bakeneko muttered. Plus ultra, he thought his soul had left his body when a sudden jolt of surprise shocked his being. He felt it even more when the Bakeneko lost her balance and sunk her claws deep into the back of his spine and 𝐶𝑟𝑃𝑃𝐿𝑢𝑙𝑇RA. Izuku shouted. He just dipped his head into a DMN volcano. He was so red. This was not how things were supposed to go. The long and agonizing walk over to the training arena was hell. His back hurt and his head felt like a crimson balloon about ready to burst with embarrassment. Just the feeling of eyes humorously staring at him was difficult enough. Standing along the wall, Izuku leaned back against the cold cement barrier. The pinpricks from the Bakeneko's claws etching into his back rested on the chilly surface. With a deep breath, he inhaled the crystal cold air and exhaled his thick worries. Despite the freezing temperatures, Izuku still sweated underneath his bangs. Brunette hair from across the crowd hooked onto his attention. Her bright brown eyes, now closed in short meditation, had furrowed brows above them. Izuku could only try to copy her heavy breathing, but he sure as hell knew this feeling wouldn't go away. And without thinking, his feet moved his body forward straight to her presence. What was he thinking? He wasn't too sure. A strong firm hand gripped tightly onto his shoulder before that same voice from before spoke up. "Why are you here?" the taller boy asked. Izuku didn't realize what he had said, so he turned his head towards a very well-built frame. He sure was intimidating. "Oh my," hoping to interfere. "Yeah." Izuku jumped. No, I'm not." That kid was acting like a total idiot near the front gate. He flinches at the slightest touch. Voices began to chatter and chime together, whispers, laughs, and murmurs. Izuku's stomach churned in anxiety, but at the same time, he really couldn't blame them for thinking that. The Bakeneko loudly groaned in such exaggerated annoyance that Izuku was scared the boy thought he was the one who groaned. The taller boy's eyebrows raised if that helped him any better too. "And begin." No one moved, yet their faces turned towards the skyscraper housing the one and only, present mic. "What's wrong?" The test started. "Run. Run." Reverberating footsteps against the wet cement from below. Heads flew by his body and past the gate behind him. Izuku's shoulder was pushed by a couple of people, knocking him out of his confusion and forcing him back to reality. He was left behind. This wasn't good. Kids were already pouncing onto ginormous robots, bursting their insides out with all kinds of cool quirks. Something brushed against Izuku's legs. Looking down, he saw a flicker of the 𝗵𝗃𝐻's body flash before turning invisible once again. Think of the plan, Izuku. Stay calm, stay calm. His legs turned a sharp corner, almost flinging his body onto the ground if not for the wall he held his hand against. The boy lost his balance and tumbled onto his bottom. His back was uncomfortable as it was situated next to a dark, dingy alleyway wall. How does this work? His chest rose and fell rapidly. He waited for the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 to appear before him. It'll only hurt for a pinch, but after that, your body will be controlled by me. You will see out of your eyes as if you're watching a movie. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻 approached him, her form already palpable. Sudden flicks of black and golden lights began to hover above her form like a cosmic light show. Stay still. The sudden burst of pain encroached into his body, flooding his veins and head with flashing, white, agonizing lights. His vision, corroding before him, sat in a pit of darkness for only a second. Only a second, before it was granted back to him. He couldn't move his limbs, couldn't move his mouth or control his breathing, but the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 was doing everything for him. It felt unreal, so detached. Golden lights began to appear from thin air right before him. Lights mixed in with black undertones swirled and danced, mimicking galaxies and stars. Then the orbs came. 2 of them. Their lustering movements brightening the dark alley surrounding them. Izuku's hands, now controlled by the 𝗵𝗃𝐻, lifted up into their vision, each one rotating as the cat analyzed the new sensations. The patch covering his other eye was blurred by their peripheral vision and their legs just below themselves were blurred as well. This was a trip. This was exactly like seeing a movie. Looking back up, the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 stared into the light ahead of them. Soon enough, she moved his body forward and out of the hidden. Robots were littered across the road, parts and screws flung onto ledges and trees. Despite only being inside of the alleyway for 30 seconds, so much damage had already occurred. If Izuku had a body, his fingers would be crossed, bottom lip scrunched between his teeth. It was up to the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 to decide whether she would participate in the trial or flee the arena, leaving Izuku's last hope behind. So the next move she committed made Izuku's detached heart jump, literally. Their legs bent down and sprang into the air. Up and up and up they went. The wind, Izuku wished he could feel it, flattened his white hair and flailed around in his vision. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻 turned their head around and scanned the area. More robots littered themselves between the buildings, this time alive and walking. All things that come up must come down, so there they went. The immediate drop of their body was mind-numbing as it began to gain more and more speed. Without even noticing, Izuku's foot had crashed onto the ground, asphalt flying into the air as the robots around them were harshly thrown into buildings. The sounds of metal against metal fed into Izuku's mind like speakers inside a movie theater. 10 points. A voice fed into his mind. He figured that must have been the 𝗵𝗃𝐻. Thinking. To him. Can you hear me? Izuku thought. Yes. Now shut up. Jumping off the ground and onto a building, their fingers curled around a window's ledge and pulled themselves up. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻 positioned themselves to overlook the chaos of quirks clashing with the metallic bangs across the playground. With experience, she jumped up once again and slammed their feet onto a field of robots, knocking each one down with a powerful blast. 15 points. She thought. 24 points. 30 points. 41 points. 44 poi, her thoughts halted, and so did Izuku's. They both heard the enormous roars of creaking buildings engulfing the mock city. It rose from the debris of glass and metal, gears and mechanics whirring in a cacophony. Smoke outlined the figure hovering above them all. This was the most intimidating thing he's ever seen, and take that from Izuku, the boy who lives alongside Yokai. Jumping from a building's rooftop, one Izuku never realized they were both on, the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 pounced onto the asphalt with a sly, feather-like roll. Cautiously, their head rose to face the groaning skyscraper lingering upon them. The steaming limbs etched themselves into the surrounding buildings for balance. Run! If we try to destroy it, we'll lose time, help. The 𝗵𝗃𝐻's attention was caught only for a second, the flick of a glance at the brunette crushed underneath a piece of debris. Then they turned around automatically, following the fleeing crowd without a sense of hesitation, not even a single thought of saving her. What are you doing? Help her, she's stuck. She might die. This is a simulation. You said I should focus on the robots that matter. Why you don't get it, just go help her. You don't have a choice. Their running feet slowed down to a stop. His head turned, their head turned, and they both saw the girl once more. The face of complete despair, a clinging feeling towards life still trying to keep her alive, even if this really was a simulation. Maybe the cameras couldn't see this. The staff probably couldn't see this, they probably couldn't do anything. Run. Their body bolted at the girl. Izuku was ready to reach their hand out towards her, they were so close, her chocolate eyes recognizing him on sight, so close until they were in the air. He wasn't expecting the sudden jump as the wind blew past their face and between their hair. The windows reflected their flying figure heading straight towards the titan of a robot. Their hand held the ball of light which floated beside them. They arched their arm back and then, boom. Lustering light glared back at him. The robot, now deformed and sparking, groaned and screeched back as its metallic parts crushed together, shrilling. He was falling. They were falling. No, they weren't falling, he could control his hands, he could turn his head and smell the gasoline mixed in with dust. Bitter air rushed past his ears, the faint whispers of white still painted into his hair. And he was nearing the ground. Izuku was aware of everything around him. He was completely alone. After all this time, I can't die here. Izuku looked around, saw his helpless body through the glass windows, his hair no longer white as the snowy road coming closer, but he couldn't find the 𝗵𝗃𝐻. His thumping heart was a tattoo against his chest. Izuku couldn't even breathe, he was falling through the air at such a fast rate. Trying to see was getting harder by the second, yet he could see the inevitable splatter of his body as the cement glared back at him, a slap against his cheek. And he was face to face with paw prints imprinted into the snow. Cat paw prints. Izuku heard a GG and then he was face planting into the snow, luckily without the splatter of his body. His hands lifted himself out of the mess and pushed himself onto his bottom almost immediately. Izuku pulled his hair out of his face and blinked a couple of times until he saw those paw prints engraved deep into the snow. They seemed to run off behind a couple of buildings and out of sight. It was getting strong to concentrate. Izuku looked down once again and was greeted by their mocking existence, running around, ditching him in the air, leaving him, what the hell. Of course the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 would ditch him at the last second, even if that last second was him falling dozens of stories. Damn it, he was such a dumbass. And to make matters worse, what would All Might think? Izuku went to him, saying he's quirkless and weak, and that man gave him the hope he'd always wanted. He just screwed that up, and at what cost? A foul pit of regret sprawled in the back of his mind. It clawed against the back of his eyelids and against his throat with sudden bursts. Izuku's vision watered and his breath shortened in quick all the while, his mind muttered his mistake, over and over. There was no time to feel sad. No time at all, so Izuku shook his head and relaxed his breathing. In and out, softly, slowly, easily. To the outside, maybe it looked like he was shocked. It was nearly impossible to steady himself out and hop back onto his feet. Izuku's heart and ribs hurt for some reason, although he was sure his body didn't take any damage, it was probably a side effect of the 𝗵𝗃𝐻's possession. Cautiously, Izuku moved his fingers around and felt a couple of cracks reverberate in his knuckles here and there. The weighted inhales painted the air in front of him. He closed his good eye and thought of something nice, anything nice. Opening them up again, the white light bouncing from the snow entered into his vision. Izuku took another shaky breath to equal himself out before turning around. Behind him lay an enormous and battered machine with smoke piling out of its gears and pores. A battlefield of mechanics crumbled onto each other, making Izuku regret forcing the 𝗵𝗃𝐻 to attack it because it sure did look expensive. Oh! The boy turned his head and found that same girl from before lying helplessly on a pile of mechanisms. Her face was squished up in anguish. Her cheek was flattened against a puddle of puke too. Izuku quickly made his way over to the brunette with deer legs. The closer he approached, the more worn out she looked, with scraps of clothing torn in a few places, a couple of small wounds littered across her rosy cheeks. Hey, Izuku said, "Are you alright?" The girl groaned in pain. Her hands, with pink pads on the tips of her fingers, loosened their tough grip around the metal. They sluggishly relaxed until she seemed to lose consciousness. Oof, that position did not look comfortable to sleep in. Izuku hesitantly lifted her shoulders up and slid her away from the bile. He regretted accidentally breathing in just for a moment. "Well done, yes, yes," a subtle voice spoke in the distance. Spinning around, Izuku could see a small figure approaching them from beyond the broken robots. With gray hair bouncing in a bun, her slow gait allowed her to toss around some gummy bears into the attendees' hands. "Eat up." A blonde and dazzling boy he had barely made out from before had strutted his hip out in confidence, a bright smirk glued to his lips. "That mademoiselle is the backbone of UA, recovery girl." Izuku hadn't noticed her approaching him until he barely managed to catch the gummy bears she had thrown at his hands. She was about as tall as his legs, if not then maybe even a bit shorter. Recovery girl's head faced the brunette lying on part of a robot and her brows furrowed. "Oh, this is unfortunate. What a sucky way to lose unconsciousness." Using her cane, she pulled herself up onto the ledge and pursed her lips. Much to Izuku's surprise, she the girl's forehead. Ever so slowly, a green hue rose from her body and healed her scrapes and wounds. "Any other hurt children?" She scanned the crowd of surprised kids, a welcoming smile on her face. Toshinori felt sick to his stomach. That was something he didn't even have. A stomach. When he saw that same quirkless boy jump into the air and decimate dozens and dozens of robots one by one, betrayal had weighed his body heavy against his chair. It must have been too dark in the supervising room to notice his face as it went through too many emotions at once. Toshinori tried to dig out any excuses. Maybe Izuku's quirk had just bloomed between their interaction earlier this morning. That was the only thing the man could pick up. Every other option was too stupid to even ponder about. And the chance of Izuku's quirk blooming now. He trusted the boy to tell him, let alone at least call him. The number of points he earned jumping around and sinking his feet deep into each robot just made Toshinori's mind rot. Despite how skilled and amazing that quirk made Izuku, Toshinori couldn't stand thinking about him at that moment. He really couldn't be proud of his successor right now. He swore he had almost broken his phone once the truth came out from behind those screens. The walk towards his favorite restaurant was able to get his mind off of it, at least a little. With the cold that graced his skin and snuck beneath his scarf, Toshinori found it to be more of a nuisance than the thoughts of his successor. His skinny hands pushed open the doors as a gulf of warm air and music greeted him. Unraveling his scarf and taking off his jacket, he hooked it on the clothing hanger and ventured down the busy aisles. "Long time no see, Yagi," Tsukachi greeted. His usual tan overcoat hung down his shoulders as his hat and white gloves laid upon the dinner table. That smile Toshinori hadn't seen in months fit onto the other man's face. With ease, excluding the tired eyes and droopy black circles. "Still got that jacket on?" Toshinori jokingly asked. "Can't take it off me, I get cold easily." The blonde scooched down the LTHR seat and replied with a smile as well. Toshinori let out a sigh and rolled his shoulders back, a small chuckle rising from his chest. "What have you been up to lately? What have I missed out on?" Tsukachi shared the moment of short-lived laughter before he began to speak. "You have no idea, so many cases I can't get my hands to the bottom of it." "Busy, yeah." Tsukachi nodded. "I feel that. What's a file you're most passionate about?" Toshinori watched as the other man's brows furrowed in thought. A few seconds went by as his mouth opened but quickly shut from a passing consideration. "Well, there are a couple. That's to put it lightly. But there are your usual villains hiding around, bet they're gonna get into trouble real soon." A missing case file. I don't really like handling those, but I don't mind sticking my nose where it doesn't belong from time to time. Tsukachi rubbed his thumb across his cheek, his chin resting against the rest of his 4 fingers. There's one I'm really interested in, but that'll take too long to explain. How have you been so far? Toshinori played around with the menu in his hands. The glare from the warm lights hit the plastic and shined onto the red and beige walls beside him. Where do I even begin? A few months ago I thought I found my successor. Really? Yep, Toshinori popped the T before his shoulders slouched down. In fact, that was the reason why I organized this dinner, thought the entrance exam would go well for him and it'd be for a nice little celebration. Tsukachi stared at him with a studious gaze. It didn't go well, did it? I always knew he wasn't ready to use it. Training started a bit late and even I had my own doubts. The thing is, Toshinori ran his hand through his wild locks, sighing in exhaustion. SHT, I apologize for making this occasion so depressing, but the kid had a quirk all along. He was lying about his quirklessness this whole time. Tsukachi's hands froze, eyes widening in shock. Before he could reply, Toshinori had already beat him to it. I should have known better. He seemed like such a good kid. You have to get it back from him. The blonde shook his head sluggishly as he stared at the menu. No, don't worry. I didn't give it to him. He just showed up at the exams and showed off his quirk. But I really can't believe how much I F up. I think he used my training to get a head start in his hero career. That's horrible, Tsukachi silently commented. The man leaned back against the chair, seemingly in defeat as he kept his voice low. You can always confront Sir 𝗏𝐻𝐼 about this. Doesn't he have a successor ready for you? Yeah, at least there's a good side to this, I think. Toshinori paused in thought before looking back up. The chatter of neighboring tables and stoves grilling patties filled the restaurant with white noise. Anyway, no Mesa, what else has been happening? I'm afraid I got a bit too dark there. Tsukachi recovered from the news and sat back up. Maybe a way to keep your mind off of this is a drink. I can sure get one right now. Shortly after, a waiter approached their table and wrote down their orders. Toshinori's favorite, a hamburger like in America as well as a non-alcoholic substitute for sake due to obvious health reasons. Tsukachi followed his lead and got the same thing with a side of fries. The two kept up their small talk, catching up on each other's lives and how much had changed in the span of a few months. To make things short, lots of things could change in a few months. You were saying, Toshinori took a sip of his drink, about a case when I first got here. What's all that about? It is quite dark, but if you're up to it, Tsukachi said. The blonde nodded in approval, waiting for him to speak. Well, there's a kid around here who was involved in an incident. A really tricky kidnapping. He supposedly wandered into the bathroom and came out with scratches everywhere. It tripped up us detectives because we thought the boy kidnapped her in some way, but it was actually someone else. He stared up at the ceiling in thought, like he was still trying to piece the puzzle together. He was quirkless, so of course it wasn't him, but it turns out he has connections to the kidnapper. What an unlucky bastard. How would a quirkless kid get involved with criminals? That's what I'm trying to figure out, but I'm sure he was forced into it. If it was at the last minute, or if it was organized for a long while, I can't decipher it. You must have interviewed him already, correct? Toshinori saw Tsukachi nod his head. How was he like? He was quiet, nerdy, not really your popular type. That probably got him caught up in the kidnapper's manipulation. His mom said he wanted to get into UA but his quirklessness was in the way of getting into the hero course. Wait. What's the kid's name? Toshinori interrupted. His sunken eyes widened in anticipation. I know you might be thinking that your successor and this boy are the same people, but he isn't, don't worry. When I interviewed his mom, I asked if he had a quirk and she said no. She was telling the truth. Toshinori exhaled his climbing anxiety and sunk into the LTHR seat. Playing with the silverware he hadn't touched the entire time, the man focused on the blue and orange lights glaring against the fork's metal. I know we've promised not to release anybody's private information, but just this once, can you tell me the kid's name? Tsukachi idly watched the fork spin around underneath the other man's slender fingers until he leaned forward and looked Toshinori in his eyes. His name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm sure he's not holy SHT. The restaurant stilled for a moment before it continued its mindless chatter. That's my successor. Toshinori whispered. He spoke quietly, but his words kept the bite of surprise laced within them. The man placed the fork back down and gripped the edges of the table. His name is Izuku Midoriya. I promised him it. I promised him it before training him, and then that's when the entrance exam happened. Tsukachi straightened his lips into a line as Toshinori trailed off. The blonde's thoughts tangled like yarn inside of his mind. What the hell was he doing? Young Midoriya's a good kid, what the hell was he? Do you think he was a late bloomer? When I first saw him this morning, he was acting strange. He said he wasn't being truthful, and that's when he showed his quirk during the test. The kid is truthful, though. I know he would tell me if he finally got his quirk. Maybe it could have something to do with the kidnapping. No, maybe. I'm not too sure, Toshinori mumbled. Tsukachi, you said the kid's mom was being honest when she specifically said he was quirkless. I was thinking about this on my way here, and the way young Midoriya was acting this morning was out of the ordinary. It seemed as if he was stressed about something. He had some doubts about himself. Maybe it did have something to do with the kidnapping. Backtrack this, Yagi. Let's focus on the timeline. The kidnapping happened months ago, and during the incident, there were scorch marks on the ceiling and big paw prints burned into the floor. The girl who was kidnapped had her vomit left inside one of the toilets and disappeared from the building. Shortly after that, Toshinori felt a grimace before listening again. Midoriya exited the school and escaped through the back gate. Tsukachi took a deep breath through his nose. Even talking about this seemed to make the detective nervous. Toshinori could only mimic his breathing while his sweaty palms sat in his lap. The cameras outside the building caught the girl walking towards the same gate Midoriya had used, except she climbed the wall. Whatever influenced her actions were able to completely control her body, even despite her wounds, so that's one possible quirk user. Also, it'd be impossible for an intruder to hide in the bathroom without being caught by any of the cameras, so that means one must have had a teleportation quirk, Toshinori finished. Or something along those lines. And if they did have a teleportation quirk, couldn't they have just teleported the girl away from the school? They already teleported the other quirk users, so it'd be much easier. But they didn't. The track stopped inside the plants beyond the wall she climbed over. It's like they up and disappeared. We tried to figure out if this quirk had a time limit, but their teleportation to and from the campus wouldn't make sense if they completely disregarded the girl and let her wander free instead of immediately taking her with them. What exactly were they planning? Toshinori asked. He wasn't given an answer. Well, going back to the topic before, if Midoriya is a late bloomer, he wouldn't have told his mother because she still believes he's quirkless. If he did partake in the kidnapping, he must have had the quirk since then. If this is the case, Midoriya must be hiding his quirk for a reason. The criminals he's being forced to work with, possibly. His quirk was nothing like that. Didn't involve fire or teleportation, mind reading, nothing like that, Toshinori quickly rebutted. From the screens, it looked like his hair had turned white and he had these two orbs floating around him. It gave him strength too, so, no. I don't think he used his quirk during the kidnapping. Tsukachi crossed his arms in silent frustration. The two sat still for a minute, reflecting over the newly acquired information. Toshinori's food had already gotten cold, his drink halfway empty as the ice clinked together. The music playing from the speakers drummed along with an English-speaking singer. If he tried strong enough, the blonde could make out the words she sang behind the constant talking of the consumers. I need to talk to young Midoriya about this, Toshinori blurted. They both had the same villain's name in their minds. The man sitting across from him detached his focus from his food and then stared at the blonde. 𝗀𝗏𝐻𝐻𝐸 nodded his head with a bit of indecisiveness before clearing his throat. I think that'd be a good idea.